All right, good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, especially to your excellencies, as well as our esteemed IAP members, fellow speakers, leaders, experts, delegates, attendees, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, welcome to day 2 of the National Climate Governance Summit 2024. Now this time, unlike yesterday we had a bit of delay on the coffee, but today's coffee has been served quite early. So just to warm everybody up, can I hear a round of applause, please? Thank you very much. All right. Our theme for today is managing systemic risks to the financial system and capital markets. We had a series of insightful and valuable sessions shared yesterday by our distinguished speakers, and I'm sure everyone is eager to get today's proceedings started promptly. Also present with us here today, ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to acknowledge that we have Yang Berbahagia Dato Muhammad Faiz Azmi, the Executive Chairman of Securities Commission Malaysia. Can we give him a big hand? Welcome, Dato. Thank you so much for joining us this morning and for gracing our event with your presence. And ladies and gentlemen, to kickstart our event here for day 2, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Yang Berbahagia Datin Sri Sunita Rajakumar, founder and chairperson of Climate Governance Malaysia, CGM. Let's give her a big hand.
Thank you so much, everyone, and welcome back to day 2 of the National Climate Governance Summit. This is our second year. We're so deeply grateful to everyone who stepped up to support us. In particular, of course, the Ministry of Natural Resources, Environmental Sustainability. Minister Nick Nazmi actually agreed to come out 3 times in 3 days, and we're very grateful for that. We are laser focused on capacity building, so all our events are free of charge. We could not have done this without the help of our sponsors. Thank you to all of them. As you're aware, the recordings for this morning will be up around lunchtime. Yesterday's recordings are all up and they're time tagged, so you can jump immediately to the speaker that you want to follow. In particular, we also have supporters who are helping us by putting the word out and helping us in terms of interns as well, and we want to thank them also. Thank you so much. CGM's signature event is now in its 2nd edition, and over the course of these 3 days, we will feature 90 speakers at the main sessions, at 7 masterclasses and 14 workshops. So please sign up for the workshops and masterclasses, which are going to be running in parallel over this afternoon and tomorrow afternoon as well. These are great learning opportunities, fabulous speakers that we have, and it's free of charge. So please avail yourself of this. Now, I do want to highlight that on Monday, we had a closed-door meeting, what we call the IAP Summit, because we have our International Advisory Panel with us in Kuala Lumpur, and we had a great session, with a closed-door session with the Minister, where we had a frank exchange of views. So these are some of the highlights. We have 11 universities running satellite events during the summit. Thank you so much, and we couldn't have done this without the support of the Ministry of Higher Education and Alam, hosted under Bank Pembangunan. All of this information is available in your program book. There's one partner who didn't want to be mentioned, but we are in their beautiful venue. So thank you so much again to Bank Negara for hosting us yet for a 2nd year. So these are the hardworking volunteers who have made this happen. Thank you so much to the CGM Council for helping out over the 5 years. We have featured, just in the last 2-3 years, we've featured over 340 speakers. We have curated 22 articles in The Edge. All of this information is available in your program book. So we're grateful to The Edge for supporting us as well. I especially want to thank our 2 full-time staff, Saras and Shern, and Audrey, who helps us with our finances on a volunteer basis as well. I want to keep my opening remarks short, but what I had shared yesterday, which I'd like to repeat today, is 25 years ago, in 1997, Malaysia was one of 4 countries in the eye of the storm during the Asian financial crisis. And this is when we realized the importance of corporate governance, that crises have complex roots, but if you don't have strong levels of corporate governance, then it's very hard for investors to have visibility as to how the company is being run. And at the same time, you have this challenge of moral hazard, that the government might not be able to afford multiple rounds of rescues. So this is something we need to be aware of and learn from it, because 25 years later, a subset of corporate governance is climate governance, which is what we're very serious about. How institutions and businesses can identify, can manage, can measure, can mitigate risks arising from the climate crisis. And this time, in a warming world, it's going to be almost impossible for governments to run multiple rounds of rescues. The modeling that's shared in the IPCC's Summary for Policymakers in 2018 was clear that to keep 1.5 degrees of warming alive, which we have all committed to, absolute emissions need to decline by 45% by 2030, but we already know that the 30-day warming average is already at 1.58 degrees. And so, in a world where extreme weather events are going to increase in frequency and severity, you might have a robust net zero strategy, but if the roads to your premises are impassable, your staff can't come into work, this is the price that we are going to pay for the lack of climate governance in a global climate crisis. This is an incredibly difficult transition that we are facing, and we need to ensure that we're building resilience amongst every single individual. So the question that you might want to consider is, what if resilience was your legacy? Because everything we do, every breath we take is on trust, or amanah, right? So I want to leave these thoughts with you. We've got a great lineup of speakers this morning. Thank you so much for showing up, and especially for the hundreds of people that are watching online as well. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you, Yang Berbahagia Datin Sri. Well done. Now again, ladies and gentlemen, just to remind all of you of the purpose that we are here. There are many urgent challenges associated with climate change. I understand that the task is daunting, but it is our responsibility to take good care of our legacy. And ladies and gentlemen, let's jump straight into our program here today. With that, let us begin with the first keynote for the title, Capital Markets, Supporting a Smooth and Just Transition. Our speaker for this keynote session has over 38 years of experience in the audit and business advisory services in Malaysia and the UK. He had also been involved in the financial restructuring of government agencies as well as investigations. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Yang Berbahagia Dato Muhammad Faiz Azmi, Executive Chairman of Securities Commission Malaysia.
Yang Berbahagia Datin Sri Sunita Rajakumar, Founder and Chairperson, Climate Governance Malaysia. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good morning. First, I must thank Datin Sri Sunita for both inviting me to speak at this governance summit and also teaching me all I need to know about climate change. I have to say that in every society, you need passionate people to help improve things, and I think Sunita is definitely one of them. So I had prepared this speech some time ago, and it kind of explained what the Securities Commission is doing in terms of this particular topic. But that kind of changed last weekend. I had the privilege of listening to His Royal Highness the Sultan of Perak speak at one of our roundtables, the SC OSIS roundtable in Oxford last weekend. And listening to him speak on the topic, which was humanity and finance, it made it kind of clear to me that it wasn't just about what we are doing or how we are doing things, it's about why we're doing things or not doing things. And while people and governments do emit their fair share of greenhouse gases, it is the corporate world as a group that emits the most. Now, the usual reason given is that corporates must generate returns, not just for their shareholders, but also their stakeholders, and cost is obviously a key driver. Essentially, they're maximizing profits as an objective. So the question now is this all that we can expect from companies? Is making good returns the only purpose? So let me use the words of Tuanku Perak on this particular matter. Just to be clear, his words, not mine. So, quote, "At its heart, restoring humanity in finance means that the previously paramount goal of economic growth must now be balanced far more carefully with the goals of environmental stewardship and social inclusion. It means that the pursuit of profits must be tempered by a recognition of our collective responsibility to protect our environment and better serve society at large. Businesses must become part of the solution to our various global challenges. They must take responsibility for their broader impacts on the world around them, or their stakeholders as well as shareholders no longer are able to dismiss them as being outside their primary profit-making function." And the good news, I think, he thinks, is that there is now widespread recognition that the time for unfettered capitalism is over. Businesses are no longer able to disregard their broader impacts. Instead, they are expected to avoid and minimize harm, and also increasingly to compensate for any harm that they've caused. Mining companies must clean up when they leave a site. Agricultural companies must allocate land for protective buffers around waterways. The chemicals they use are now carefully monitored, and the workers applying them must have protective gear, unquote. Now, these words resonate with me, and it should resonate with all the corporates and their regulators. Enough is enough, and we should recognize that the time for unfettered capitalism is over. Now, bringing the matter closer to home, as custodians of the capital market, we have a profound responsibility not just to navigate these challenges, but to ensure that our transition is just and inclusive. The concept of just transition is key. It embodies the principle that no one should fall behind, and we move towards a more sustainable economy. This is not merely an environmental or economic imperative. It's actually a moral one. It means safeguarding livelihoods, protecting the vulnerable, and creating opportunities for all segments of society. For the capital market, our role goes beyond facilitation. We must actively shape a future where capital flows towards investments are not just sustainable, but also socially responsible. Ladies and gentlemen, the capital markets has the potential to be a major catalyst in this transition. We can help direct investments into critical sectors like renewable energy, green technology, and sustainable agriculture, to name a few. Malaysia has one of the largest bond markets in the region that can support such needs. It also means supporting small and medium enterprises in their sustainability journey, ensuring that they have access to financing and resources needed to thrive in a low-carbon economy. In this regard, the SC's principles-based SRI taxonomy, introduced in 2022, was one of the first taxonomies globally to include a social component, furthering SC's commitment towards a more holistic approach to sustainable and responsible investments. Beyond environmental concerns, the SRI taxonomy incorporated three key social objectives. Firstly, enhanced conduct towards workers, consumers, and affected communities. This inclusion reflects Malaysia's leadership in Islamic finance too, where ethical and social investing are paramount. The development of these social objectives were shareholder-centric, ensuring a comprehensive assessment of social impact of economic activities. And when the transition has happened, we will have to deal with the consequences. In other words, how do we continue to operate in a world that's significantly hotter? The market, again, has a role in helping to ensure some resilience in the economy, but also providing capital for climate adaptation work that is to come. This is normally the government's responsibility, but the private markets have a role to play using a mixture of blended finance and other tools to make some of these projects bankable. In this regard, the SC has been proactive in developing frameworks and guidelines to create an ecosystem that encourages sustainable practices and sustainable investments can flourish. Since 2011, we've embedded the SRI into our key growth strategy in the capital markets master plans. So under CMP3, Master Plan 3, and the SRI roadmap, we continue to develop a robust SRI ecosystem in Malaysia, including innovative products that meet diverse needs of businesses and investors. We have seen early successes, such as the financing of Malaysia's sustainable development goals and climate ambitions. Since the release of the SRI Sukuk framework, 27.6 billion ringgit of SRI Sukuks have been issued in Malaysia, funding a wide range of products from renewable energy to affordable housing. But that's not really enough. As part of our CMP4 deliberations, which is really for, I guess, a year from now, when we start the next period of our capital markets plans, we will start to consider if our market can be right sized to cover climate adaptation needs. This is the need for long-term funding and infrastructure projects. Another development was to look at Islamic finance again to make it relevant to climate issues. SC recently introduced the principles behind something we call Maqasid al-Sharia guidance for the Malaysian Islamic capital markets. So what is this guidance? It has 6 aspirations and 15 principles that complement the existing Sharia rules. These aspirations and principles look at the true intent of Islam, beyond the ritual and the rules, the substance, if you like. We believe this guidance will help explain better how Islamic finance can be used in the context of a just transition and to mitigate some of the climate effects. We are also about to release the National Sustainability Reporting Framework, ensuring that our financial and sustainability reporting aligns with both the science of climate change and also the ethical and moral expectations on your businesses. After all, you cannot control what you can't measure. We're also about to look at other aspects, for example, future skills. So the demand for skills in green technology, sustainable finance, and responsible business practice will continue to grow. And events such as this are things that we would like to encourage. This means investing in education, training, and capacity building initiatives that can equip our workforce with the right skills needed. So the Securities Industry Development Corporation, SIDC, the capacity building arm of SC, is leading efforts to educate and empower market participants on sustainable practices. Currently, SIDC has 47 titles of programs on sustainability and SRI, catering to the different needs of organizations in the capital market. They will also work with other bodies to curate a list of industry-relevant training. To drive a just transition, organizations must be equipped with the knowledge and tools to integrate sustainability into their operations and decision-making processes. By the way, it occurs to me that even as a regulator, we should walk the talk. So SC now has a sustainability committee. We have calculated our emissions. We're scratching our heads as to how to reduce it. And in fact, when the new framework comes in about reporting, we too will adopt those disclosures because we can't be expecting you to do it if we don't do it ourselves. So, ladies and gentlemen, in closing, let me emphasize that our journey towards a smooth and just transition is not just an economic or environmental challenge, it is also a moral and ethical one. We must all work together to create a capital market that serves the greater good, a market that not only generates wealth, but upholds the values of fairness, compassion, and sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Yang Berbagai Dato. There we go. Wonderful sharing indeed. A good way to kickstart our event here today. And ladies and gentlemen, we now continue with a panel discussion for the topic, case studies on financing the transition. With that, I would like to warmly invite our esteemed moderator for this session. Please welcome your very own Datin Seri Sunita Rajakumar, founder and chairperson of CGM, once again to the stage in doing the honor to moderate this session. And ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce our discussion panelists. Firstly, we have an industry leader with over 28 years of experience in financial services and management consulting and has been with CIMB Group for over 18 years. We have country head and chief executive officer of CIMB Bank Berhad. Let's give a big hand for Gurdip Singh Sidhu. Also on stage right now, we have a panelist with a career as a career banker with over 2 decades of experience in having held various senior leadership roles at global financing institutions in Malaysia and Hong Kong. She is the managing director and the first female CEO of UOB Malaysia. Let's give a big hand to Wei Wei Ng. Lastly, we have an impressive history of senior leadership roles in multiple organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, he is the non-independent executive director and chief executive officer of HSBC Bank Malaysia. Let's give a big hand to Dato Omar, Siddiq bin Amin, Noer, Rashid. There we go. Datin Seri, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. It's a great panel. We have all bank CEOs. If we have time, we might ask them difficult questions. But let me start off with really easy questions. Could you tell me personally what, and we'll start with the lady, of course, and then maybe in alphabetical order, CIMB, and then HSBC, sorry. What made you personally invested in the sustainability and climate agenda? What happened?
I think, good morning. I think this is where ladies first didn't work to my advantage. Thank you, Datin Seri. I think firstly, this topic just resonates very well with me at a personal level. So when I got the opportunity to take on this role, frankly, I just jumped at it. I think it is a good platform for me to contribute in shaping the kind of actions we need, not just at the economy on a larger basis, or even to the businesses that we support as a bank, but also to champion it with my employees to make sure that they do give back to society and to the planet at large. So Sunita, one of the first things I did when I took office about 2.5 years ago was to set up the sustainability function reporting directly to me. By doing this, it puts sustainability right at the top of house, giving it the authority and the mandate it needs. And from my observations, what has worked well for us in UOB is really number one, I mean, Dato has mentioned it earlier, and so did you in your welcoming speech, putting the right appropriate corporate governance that allows us to embed this throughout our core policies, processes, and activities, putting in place the right risk management policies, not just to manage our risks, but equally to capture opportunities, right? Because the financing framework we put in place, we do keep ourselves honest. We get credible second opinion providers to validate that they are in line with international best practices. And the last thing I would say is, in terms of us walking the talk, yes, we have committed to go net zero for 60% of our lending portfolio, but equally as important, UOB Malaysia, the group, we have achieved and maintained our carbon neutral status since 2021. And in Malaysia, I'm really happy to share that our bank building is the first bank building in the country to receive Platinum Green certification from both Green RE and also BCA Green Mark. So I think walking the talk is important, but still lots more to be done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wei. That was very impressive. Gurdip, hard act to follow. What are you going to say? Personally, what has motivated you?
Thank you, Sunita. Thank you for having us here. I think, the why, which Dato Faiz touched on, really is the anchor starting point. And so when we were looking at, stock taking on the strategy of the bank and thinking about what's next in 2018 and 2019, at that time I was wearing the strategy hat in the bank. And so one of the key things we spent a lot of time getting up to speed on was around sustainability, right? And so if you think about the why first for the firm and then why for me, it kind of intertwines quite a bit, right? So why is really that at the end of the day, if you think of what Dato Faiz said, which is I guess taking leave from His Royal Highness Sultan Perak, that we know that this is not the way the world can continue, right? So everyone has to jump on this journey and do it. And then if you think about who are then the providers of carrot and sticks in the ecosystem to nudge society forward or nudge businesses forward. Of course, the government is a big player in that whole space, right? But banks actually have a certain degree of influence, right? So if you think about it, if we think of our own footprint versus our scope 3, which is, our clients' emissions, our clients' emissions count for over 100x our emissions, right? So our own emission is material, but by nowhere close to, the impact that we have via the financing we give and the intermediation that we do as a bank. So the first thing on the why was really around accepting that we have a disproportionate role in influencing that call to action across the whole ecosystem. So that was one. Two is, of course, a little bit more practical aspects. So if you think about all our stakeholders besides customers, we also have regulators, and I think regulators around the world were raising the bar. So of course, as a bank, we were keeping track of that. The third stakeholder group is really our investors. And as we all know, investors have obviously also played their influencing role in ratcheting up expectations. And so likewise, we looked at it. And then even when we looked at our people, right, our employees in the bank, and it was interesting. So we did some research. Of course, we also looked at research that others had done globally. It's safe to say that, it is a little bit of a generational thing as well. So there's a direct correlation between the younger generation and their affinity to the purpose of an organization, right? The role that an organization does beyond the making of profits. And so that was another reason that we said, okay, this is something that can ignite passion, can ignite a certain degree of, motivation in our people. So those are probably all the whys. For me personally, Wewe done a lot better by being the first bank office to have all the certifications, but I hope I'm the first sort of senior banker who had, the feed-in tariffs at the beginning. So I was a beneficiary of the very high and attractive rates from Tenaga Nasional. So I had, a certain degree of, sense of maybe because I came a bit, my kids came a bit later in life. And so, if we really think of everything that we are doing here and ensuring that they are sustainable and they are, a certain degree of continuity in the future generation, then, there was a little bit of that calling. But I would say maybe that's 20%, 80% of it was really about the right thing from a business perspective.
Thank you so much. Dato Omar is running the country operations of a group that takes sustainability very seriously. But what are your personal feelings about this?
So I guess, thank you first of all, Datin Sri and everybody for the opportunity to be a part of this panel. So my personal sort of connection with, I suppose, climate change and sustainability started, I think, in high school. I was in high school in Penang, in a boarding school. And we were doing a project, this is before the war, a long time ago. We were already looking, I remember at that time, it was a project on sort of global warming, in fact. And I think we were looking at ocean levels because Penang is obviously impacted by that slightly. And it's always stayed in the background, pollution and all of that. I think over the years as well, I've served with Pricewaterhouse, with Dato Faiz, with Gurdip, CIMB. I've met many people, and I think that journey has also sort of reinforced the point on the science, right? The facts are real. I think greenhouse gas emissions are getting significant. In our lifetime, I think the numbers have gone up exponentially, the amount of carbon dioxide. I remember again, something that was again in my youth, we talked about the ozone layer, etc. But ultimately, it's very clear that humanity has left, in particular our generation has left a very sort of bad footprint on the globe. And that's something that I think, as Gurdip was saying, is reinforced by our children, our sort of families, etc., who are becoming increasingly more sensitive to these issues. And that has sort of resonated with me. And then, of course, the opportunity to join HSBC has been wonderful because HSBC is very much committed to addressing the issue of climate change. I think it's one of our 4 strategic pillars, this transition to net zero, for example. So net, I think it resonates with me at a personal level as well as a professional level. The other point I would like to also reinforce is that we agree on the facts that climate change is real, but we also have to agree that the impact, in particular to communities, to livelihoods, is also real. And at some point, it can be existential to the entire human race and every living being on the planet if nothing is being done, and nothing is done at a pace that's right, because the direction of travel is extremely scary.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's get a little bit more into the weeds now, Wei Wei. The cost of action is increasing every day. The cost of inaction is not something that we want to consider. How does UOB actually help clients to decarbonize and to transition smoothly and justly? Can you share some examples with us?
Okay. I think transitioning from brown to green really takes a lot of long-term and persistent efforts, resources, and commitment, not just from the businesses who are looking to transition, but really from the support that critical stakeholders give them. Frankly, banks clearly, as far as I'm concerned, ranks up there. We've got to do our part. So what we have been actively doing, Sunita, in UOB is really in two areas, in terms of providing not just financing, but also capacity building. Let me share a few use cases that touches on the renewable energy space, developing new technology, supporting those efforts, and thirdly, in terms of the transition framework that we have put in place, right? Now, in terms of use cases in RE, a very good example that I really feel is a real catalyst, not just in Malaysia, but across ASEAN where we operate in our key markets, is our Use Solar program. This is a very integrated, one-stop ecosystem financing solution for solar. Today, as I speak, we have 30 strategic partners on board this program across our key markets in ASEAN. And to lend testament to its credibility, this is really multiple award-winning program. Means it's been around for the last 2-3 years, developed throughout the COVID period, So in Malaysia alone, the program has actually financed more than 340 gigawatt hours of solar energy, and is still growing in pipeline. Now, in renewable energy, besides solar, in June this year, we signed an MOU that will help support the development of green hydrogen. Once it operationalizes, if the initiatives take place, it is expected to generate 240,000 tons of green hydrogen. We have also financed a biomass plant made of wood chips. So that's just some of the examples. And if I shift gear to talk about technology, we all know, everyone here is like-minded, otherwise we wouldn't be here. To transition towards net zero, we need cutting-edge, innovative technology. So on this front, we also try to do our part in UOB. We have financed the first hydrogen-powered autonomous rapid transit transportation system in Kuching, Sarawak. Now, just a little bit more context to this. Using cutting-edge hydrogen technology, it actually powers a network of autonomous trains that virtually generate zero GHG emission. And that happened last year in Kuching, Sarawak. And the last thing I will say, I don't want to steal too much time from my esteemed panels. Like many other banks also, we've put in place our transition financing framework. Just to put some context, for this framework, we work with carbon-intensive companies to focus on 4 key categories of business activities. I'm talking about operational efficiency here. I'm talking about business pivot, climate change mitigation, and also voluntary carbon credit. One use case we have financed is working with an oil and gas company to finance their pilot CCS project off Sarawak. Happy to catch up later on, but these are just some of the things that we are doing to do our part. Thank you.
That sounds very impressive, Wei Wei. Thank you for sharing. CIMB, meanwhile, has actually set 2030 targets for some high carbon intensive sectors. Could you unpack this for us a little bit?
Sure. So I think, at the start of the journey, a lot of the stakeholders were saying, oh, well and great, that companies are committing to net zero by 2050. And then, a lot of people then half jokingly say, but all of you guys are not going to be here by 2050, and who's going to be held accountable for delivering all of this? So then, as we looked at it, we said, okay, so what is what is a reasonable sort of key first major milestone, right? So 2030 is that period that we've identified. And then, so what we did, I think quite similar to other banks also, is we obviously prioritize the high emitting sectors. So we identified 6 high emitting sectors. And so we started with these 6. Of course, we did 2 first, then we did another 2, then we did another 2. So all of that culminated in the release of our white paper a couple of months ago. And so maybe I just bring 1 or 2 examples of what that entails, right? So these 6 sectors, so the first 2 sectors we did was coal for obvious reasons, and then followed by cement, which is the reason why cement is it's a fairly concentrated sector, right? There are a few very big players who dominate the space. And so for each one of these sectors, we identified obviously the baseline, the starting point of our emission intensity. So here, I think with the exception of coal, all the other sectors, we are focused on reducing the emission intensity per dollar of financing. So it's not about reducing absolute financing to that sector, but for coal, actually, it is an absolute reduction. So for coal, we said that we will exit coal financing by 2040 altogether. By 2030, we said we will reduce it by 50% from our baseline. So I'm pleased to update, actually, probably this is the first forum where we are actually updating some of these numbers, that for coal, we've actually reduced it by 37% already. So from our starting point, we said we will reduce 50% by 2030. As of now, we've already reduced 37%. So that's, quite material for the first, I would say, 2 years or so. For cement, which was the second sector we came up with, we said we will reduce carbon emission intensity by 36% from our baseline to 2030. We've reduced 11% so far. Okay, that's kind of still early, but roughly 1/3 of our targets. So for each of the other sectors just came out very recently, so we haven't started tracking progress yet. But essentially, the way we do it then is for each one of the sectors, there is a starting point, there's a 2030 number, and then you will basically see a curve that says that from now till then, intensity will drop. And then what we do is we say, okay, how are we going to contribute to that drop, right? Or what's going to be the levers to help get to that drop, right? So then we very simply look at it as passive levers and active levers. Passive levers means that where there is some underlying activity and commitments happening in the country, in the sector, that will help get us there, okay? So case in point is if you look at the real estate sector, so we put a target to reduce carbon emission intensity by 34%, but we believe that if the grid decarbonizes the way the country is projecting it to decarbonize, a large part of that reduction will be addressed via the grid decarbonization. So that's an example of a passive lever. An active lever is where we are the portfolio, right? We are the portfolio, if you like, manager of our financing. So active lever is how we then disproportionately shift new business to those that are greener, right? So again, if you take real estate as an example, that's pretty obvious. So we will be very happy to finance your building if you can't, if you have challenges financing internally. But that's a great example where if it's a green building, then we will definitely want to finance more of those, right? So you've got passive levers, you've got active levers, and for each sector, so if you think of oil and gas, the active lever will be a lot more than the passive lever, right? And the active lever for oil and gas is really wanting to support clients who are investing a lot more in lower emitting fuel sources, right? So maybe, yeah, that's kind of how we've approached it.
Yeah, thank you so much. That sounds very inspiring indeed. Omar, maybe you want to describe how you're collaborating with government and exploring cross-sectoral solutions.
The Malaysian government, okay, just to be clear, some other shadow government. Jokes aside, no, I think this whole issue is real and it's very important. But having said that, I also feel that it's good to also set the context. I mean, what Dato Faiz was talking about in terms of the capital markets playing an important role, absolutely. But the reality of it is that the climate change challenge is huge and significant. I'm sure all of you know it. And I think the key player here is, at the end of the day, the government. I think the government has the willpower to set laws and regulations that really drive change. For example, banning coal outright. That will make the biggest shift for all of us. Having said that, of course, sitting in the government's shoes, which I'm not, but illustratively, there are also trade-offs to be borne in mind. Of course, transition is not an easy thing to do. It can't happen overnight. I mean, the most impacted people, and we talk about just transition, are the relatively poorer people, the poorer communities who depend on a lot of emissions-heavy energy, for example, transport links, etc. So it has to be a whole of government approach towards driving climate adaptation and climate sort of transition. From HSBC's perspective, I think, and it's consistent with what Gurdip and Wei were talking about from the banking sector, I think we try to play a role as an economic agent. I think we're very clear that we're not going to overnight solve everybody's problems, but the key thing is to work with clients and customers and stakeholders and the government over a period to facilitate transition where we can. And a lot of that is about organizing and collaborating with providers of capital. We talk about blended finance today, multilateral banks, the philanthropic organizations, family offices, as well as bank and our own individual retail customers, for example. And then working towards that, organizing and creating governing structures, for example, whether it's in the form of loans, it's the form of receivables finance, trade finance, or some of you know the bonds that we put out, the outcome bonds, sustainability bonds, etc., right? But fundamental to that, I guess, coming back to the point I was trying to make earlier, it's important to work with customers and stakeholders and the government on a clear transition pathway. And everybody's transition pathway will be different. Now, in terms of working with the government, a lot of it is coming back to that point. Finding and identifying projects that are at the edge of bankability, helping them make those projects bankable, either through the form of raising the right or bringing together the right types of investors and capital providers, bringing together also knowledge partners where we are able to work towards changing or modifying regulations to make such projects bankable. And I think we need to go for the big swings, and that's what we're trying to do. I think, for example, HSBC, together with some other banks, are working in Indonesia, for example, with an early retirement of a coal plant. We're working with some multilateral banks in Philippines to drive the adoption of solar, for example, in certain areas. And similarly, we're engaging the government here in Malaysia on a couple of projects where we feel we can really sort of move the needle. As Gurdip was saying earlier, the key areas of greenhouse gas and carbon emissions sit with energy. We can't run away, right? The bulk of the carbon that gets emitted sits with heat and electricity, whether it's gas or coal and fossil fuels, etc. How do we move that needle will, I think, really lead to a better outcome and a faster outcome for the world. Sorry.
Okay, really good. There's so many layers to the climate finance stack, and bringing in other layers can help to de-risk the entire project. So that's really important. I understand UOB is also very proactive in supporting the transition of SMEs. Could you talk to us about that, please?
Thank you. I think SMEs in Malaysia, just like SMEs in many other countries, are the ones that are most vulnerable and they need a lot of help, right? So for us in UOB, beyond financing, we focus a lot on capacity building. We develop a lot of bespoke programs that we offer free of charge to the SMEs. And I want to share some of these programs that really starting to make positive impact, and we just need to scale it up even further, right? One of it is working together with PwC Malaysia. We develop a sustainability compass. So this is an online assessment tool that tells our SME where they are in the ESG stage of maturity. Where are they currently? And what are the recommended action steps that they could take to progress on that journey? Now, to make this compass even more effective in being used, right, what we did was we specially curated a program called Dome Transform Sustainability Accelerator Program. Now, this program, we really work together with like-minded partners in the government agency and private sector like MITI, MIDA, MGTC, TIG, and even Green RE to curate a program that runs for a few days, for the SMEs that would teach them not just fundamental ESG knowledge, but equally as important, the how in implementation. For example, how to conduct materiality assessment to be able to estimate your own emission and therefore what you need to do to progress further. So I think the compass and the program is landing very well. In fact, just to add credibility, the program recently was also awarded an award for what it can deliver. What else? I think probably the last point I want to share is also, it's not just about what UOB does. It is what we do at the industry level. So together with Bank Negara, UOB co-chairs the JC3 SME Focus Group. Whilst we co-chair, but frankly, the participants involved are huge. It's not just regulators, it's not just bankers like CIMB, HSBC, and many of the banks in Malaysia. It included insurance companies as well. It included the government sector. So working as one ecosystem, you can't do more, you can never do enough, right? You educate, you do capacity building, and just one thing this focus group did was we launched a Jumpstart portal. It's on JC3's website. This portal is so easy to access for SMEs, just to go in and get the basic information and all. So I'm excited. I mean, if I look at the sustainability financing sign up over the last couple of years, it's grown 3 times faster than my conventional loans, and more than 30% are to SME. So I think people are genuinely interested. And if I look at some of our visitors here, I mean, from overseas, it just reminded me, CBAM, that is the other one. That one, through our engagement with our customers, they say, wait, how do we do this? What do I need to do? The regulation will impact us. So we do masterclass on topical matters that helps the SME. So the list can go on, but I hope I've given you enough ideas of what we are doing with our partners in the industry. Thank you.
Thank you for doing all of this. CIMB, sustainable finance targets that you have set. How is this looking?
Yeah, so when we started our what we call, the formal embracing of sustainability as a key part of our strategy, we identified a few what we call main trackers, right? Like to track how, we are progressing. So one of it was, of course, the mobilization of sustainable finance. So we started that with a 30 billion ringgit target cumulative by 2024. And this was back in 2021. Fortunately, I think as my peers here on the panel are saying, the demand has been pretty good, and so that 30 billion got upsized to 60 billion within 18 months, and then last year we increased that target to 100 billion to get to cumulatively by end of this year. So again, we are quite pleased to share that we are quite confident, or actually very confident, we will get there by end of the year. So in that sense, at least progress-wise, I think the traction has been quite good. Having said that, when we talk about sustainability here, there is broadly two main pillars. This conference is very much about climate. There's also the social lens to it, right? So our numbers of 100 billion, if you really unpack it, is close to half-half. Half social and half environment. And on the environment side, a bulk of it is non-retail, as you can imagine, right? Of course, we have some activities in the retail side, but a majority of the activities is with our wholesale clients, followed by the SMEs. In terms of, then what are some of the ways that we enable? I think no different. If you think about, what Omar touched on a little bit, the big challenge in Malaysia, and I guess in most countries, I'm sure some of our esteemed visitors here, I see Philip here who knows the European development and how banks have evolved for a long time. You typically have bankable, non-so-bankable, and not bankable at all projects, generally, right? And we just recently had an engagement with the Ministry of Economy, and they were sharing some of their data. So I think their projections has a big number. It slips my memory what is the exact number, but they more or less said that half of the amount of investment required is today deemed as unbankable in order for the country to get the grid to the target that we want to get to by 2050. So how are we going to solve for that if it's unbankable? So obviously, the words that we've heard now many times, blended finance. But the problem with blended finance is, where do we start with it, right? So a lot of people talk about blended finance. We haven't had a lot of success or traction in the country on blended finance, partly because Malaysia is not categorized. If you look at ASEAN, Malaysia is categorized as among the more developed countries. So the big source of capital for blended finance, other than in-country sources, tends to come from international multilateral agencies, your IFCs and the likes. Malaysia is not high up on the pecking order to attract them because we are seen to be middle income, and so a lot of that money goes to other parts of ASEAN. So we don't have access to that source of capital. So that's one challenge in Malaysia compared to maybe some of our peers in the region. But having said that, of course, we got to take baby steps. We got to make moves. So I was pleased to hear actually from the ministry that they've kickstarted a 2 billion fund where they will basically put up to, I believe, 30 million per project where they can come in as part of the capital provider in these blended structures. So that's a good start. So maybe just to close off, Sunita, in terms of how we then deal with these sort of opportunities out there. So for certain clients and certain projects, you don't need to do anything special. We provide financing because they have the credit worthiness, they have everything that is required. So that's just traditional finance, if you like. Then you have the next sort of tier is where we need to do a little bit of a nudge to get them moving in the right direction. So that's where we have sustainability linked structures, right? So, for example, in corporate side, we all know corporate margins are very thin. I'm sure the bankers on this panel will tell you. So we give up to 10 bips of let's call it rebate or discount or whatever, if they hit their sustainability targets. And those sustainability targets will differ from client and projects, right? On the SME side, where margins can be a little bit better for banks, so we give a rebate up to 50 bips. So again, it's quite meaningful. So that is for this group of clients who need the nudge, need the additional support, we do that. And then for the third, which is where we get into these marginally bankable projects, we really need these blended structures to come in for it to really, I think, take off. Yeah,
okay, that's a very structured approach, and that makes sense. HSBC, Innovative Climate Financing Solutions Around the World. Can you just share some ideas that you've seen?
Thanks, Datin Sri. I think in respect of financing solutions, it really is the same playbook, I think, year in, year out. I think at the end of the day, it is about ensuring that we get the right alignment between the borrower or the finance person raising the finance versus the stakeholders or the providers of finance, whether be it as Gurdip was talking about the blended finance guys, whether it's multilateral or philanthropic investors, all the way to banks and to individuals on the retail side, the whole gamut. And there are many structures which you all have seen, whether it's looking at the use of the proceeds, so you have your green bonds, your blue bonds, etc., or blue financing, etc., dedicated to ensuring that the funds you raise are specifically used for targeted, identified, sustainability compliant type of utilization. And then, of course, you've got the sort of sustainability linked or KPI linked financing, where it's linked on certain sort of targets being hit. And then, of course, more recently, for example, the World Bank did the recent outcome-driven bond, where the risk transfer moves away from the borrower executing versus an outcome being seen, and the provider of finance will provide that reward. So in that sense, I think the toolbox is pretty straightforward, and the toolbox has been there for a long time. I think what is more critical right now is making sure that we can mobilize as much capital as possible, because the challenge is huge. And together with that, we can't run away. We need governments to work together with the private sector. So that public-private partnership is critical. Some of the pledges that were made at the various COPs need to be realized to come in. And what Gurdip touched upon as well, we need to really look at projects that move the needle, and it cannot be distinguished between sort of, say, a poorer country versus a middle-income country versus developed country, for example. At the end of the day, if the project outcome is right to deliver the outcomes you want from a climate change perspective, and some of the biggest emitters are in the developed countries, for example, we should mobilize public and private finance to drive the right projects being done so we get the right outcomes. I'm working on a couple of initiatives with the government on steel, for example, and we look at what's being done in Europe, in Sweden, in the UK, where a lot of public money is put towards eliminating coal-based plants and driving towards more electricity, also the more sustainable type plants, which is exactly what we need to tackle the root cause of the issue. Because the reality is, the world's in transition. We still need steel, either for cars, for EVs, for construction, etc. But we must tackle the source of energy. So coming back to the point, I think it's important to try and mobilize as much capital as possible, align the interests, identify projects that move the needle, and then I think we can really make a difference. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dato Omar. We have 4 minutes left. Do we have any questions? It's not often you're going to get 3 CEOs in the panel. Karina. And yeah, next. I think there's a mic on the steps. Yeah, if you could. Dato Faiz, you've got any questions for them?
Thank you. So first of all, this is the best panel I've ever heard on these topics. I've been to so many that just sort of skate around the issues, and this is really excellent. So thank you. And I have a specific question on this issue of blended finance for those difficult to finance projects, because what I keep hearing again and again, particularly in emerging markets, is that there is no money in that part of the market. So in other words, everyone's very happy to rush in to finance the green stuff. So what you're talking about, the sustainable financing targets. But when it comes to, you know, prematurely shutting down a coal plant, for example, when it still has plenty of years to run, it's a difficult case to make, a difficult business case to make, and therefore there is a need for concessionary finance. If you're a middle-income country, as you pointed out, it's more difficult to access that kind of financing. So my question to you, because it's been given, that question has been posed to me and I didn't know the answer, so you can help me, is when an installation is taken out of production prematurely, and therefore there's an additionality factor in terms of the avoided emissions, has there been any consideration given to monetizing that saving in carbon emissions by trying to qualify for carbon credits?
Okay, let's take all the questions first, and then you can answer it in one shot. There's another question here.
well?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Thank you for the panel. I think it was very insightful. I was in Pulau Kapas 2 weeks ago. 80% of the coral is gone. Yeah, I think it's the case for many of the islands in the east coast of Malaysia, unfortunately. So in this slide, I'm very pleased that I've read the targets for CIMB to stop financing new oil upstream projects from 2025. I think we need to discuss this. I think it's very important to understand, and I would like to understand where the other banks sit on this, because I couldn't find as clear news as I found online for CIMB. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Tomorrow morning, we're going to unpack biodiversity and nature as well, because nature underpins every layer of the climate finance stack. Next question. The mic is just behind you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Wei Wei, for sharing your commitment and passion to drive the solar investment in ASEAN. I'd like to share that in Europe, previously they were quite averse about nuclear. But presently, the President of Europe has mentioned that Europe needs nuclear, and the European Investment Bank has made an unprecedented move to include nuclear in their financing portfolio. So I'd like to inquire, because ASEAN now is showing great interest, Indonesia, Philippines, Singapore, and also yesterday, YB Nick Nazmi has mentioned, Malaysia is also looking at it. So do you feel that ASEAN, especially ASEAN Investment Bank and also the banks in Malaysia and ASEAN, should also consider including nuclear as an important financing portfolio, so that when ASEAN goes to invest in nuclear power, the banks are already ready with that amount to provide. And secondly, if I may recommend to Dato Faiz, in the preparation of the capital market investment plan for next year, could Malaysia also please look at the possibility of including nuclear in the taxonomy? Thank you.
Hello, right. Thank you, panel, for the sharing. My name is Siti. I'm the one of the former CEO of the Malaysian Timber Certification Council. Can you hear me? Okay, so in the forestry and timber industry, so MTCC, if I know many of you may not know what MTCC did or does, we develop standards for sustainable forest management, basically, and it's for the forestry and timber industry, which is considered like a destructive industry or sector. And in the early 2000, we have had dialogues, the Malaysian Forest Dialogue, a series of, over a decade of dialogue. And some of the feedback that we keep on getting from the industry is that they were having difficulties getting financing, because one of the requirements for sustainable forest management is investment into new machines that are more environmentally friendly or much more, basically more efficient. But they were having difficulty in obtaining financing because it's considered a destructive industry. So my question is, what does the bank now consider the forestry industry? Basically, it's providing nature-based solution for climate change. And what do you consider the timber industry at the moment? And you talk about the sustainability compass. I'm very interested in that. And what would be the sustainability compass for the financial institutions, basically? That would be interesting to know. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If I can invite Gurdip, Wei Wei, and then Dato Omar to wrap.
Sunita, if I look at the 4 questions, I think not many are targeted at me. So, but okay, maybe I think Omar is quite well versed on the blended finance question, but just my 2 cents on that very quickly is the monetization of that benefit that you mentioned definitely needs to be incorporated. Where are we in that deliberation and incorporation? I don't have a direct perspective on. Maybe my colleagues might have. The second point I'll make on that very quickly is that I think the tipping point for many of these projects and opportunities to really, for momentum to build, will likely also come when the respective countries have a clear carbon, let's call it, approach, right? Whether it's a tax, whether it's a cap and trade, whatever format. So then I think it will become clear where the sources of monetization can happen and how easy is it for it to happen. But that's kind of not a complete answer. Maybe my colleagues will be able to add a little bit there. Upstream oil, I won't cover. Nuclear, the honest truth is it's too early. We just haven't got any discussions going on in the bank on nuclear and, will we have the appetite, will we not? But it's safe to say that as a general rule of thumb, when we think about banks being able to finance anything really or any project, there's a big element of government alignment. So if government is aligned on nuclear, and I assume, the diligence on that is thorough and balancing all the pros and cons, we decide to embrace nuclear, then obviously we as, a key member of, the banking fraternity and the corporate world, we will likewise take it on board and find ways to facilitate it. So that's as far as, but I'm nowhere close to understanding nuclear technology and the pros and cons other than, obviously the big news that you hear when things don't go well, right, in the world. But other than that, I don't have too much more to add about nuclear. I think the last one was also quite targeted to Wei Wei, right? So maybe I'll ask her to answer that.
Thank you, Gurdip. Wei Wei.
Okay, so the multiple good questions, I try to provide my perspective. Hopefully I can tick the box on as many of them as possible. Let me close off the easy one first. On neutral, I think for this one, the minister was quite candid. We need to study, and I don't think Malaysia is alone in this journey. Multiple ASEAN countries will have to look at it. But my point I want to make here is, even until that lands, there's still so much we can do. I'll give you an example. You will be, a couple of years ago, okay, so we made our net zero commitment by 2015. We have already identified the 6 sectors that makes up more than 60% of our lending book that we want to hit net zero. We hit our target of 25 billion Sing dollar at least a year before what we set to do, and therefore we increased our target further. So to the lady in the gorgeous green jacket, I want to say, whether nuclear or not nuclear, there's so much to be done, and we cannot stop. For us, like with many other like-minded bank partners, we believe in just transition, which means we will take a pragmatic yet assertive approach. Case in point, coal. If we look at our coal portfolio, those that we have committed to finance prior to 2022, we will see through that concession period. But we've already made a hard stand, and we're a listed company in Singapore. We said no more new coal financing. So whether it's with our partners in the industry, with our customers, we want to work with like-minded customers, which means if you're committed to this cause, you want to transition, let's work together, because there's so many frameworks we've put in place. We finance real estate, construction, energy and chemical sector, telecommunication, you name it, the major ones, right? And this is where, to my point earlier on, we work with credible second opinion providers to validate that our framework is robust. We help. So I think it is a journey. You can never, there's so much to do. So, time doesn't stand still. And if nuclear lands, then otherwise, we will do our part. Now, there are a couple of things. So I've covered my thoughts on coal. Okay, the lady asked about compass. That compass is for our customers, but we are held, as a bank, we are held to even highest level of scrutiny. As a foreign bank in Malaysia, we need to meet Bank Negara's standard. We need to meet Monetary Authority of Singapore's standard. So standard in terms of the various requirements under the taxonomy imposed on banks, disclosure, all these things are auditable, right? So if we committed the 6 sectors, we go green, we have to disclose what is the timeline. We work towards 2030, 2050. So I think the compass, in a loose way, for the bank is very real. You know, we made a commitment, we have to track our progress, we are accountable to it. It's complicated. There's no easy fix, there's no one perfect decision, but most important is what we say we want to do, we do it. So if you're sitting there thinking why only 60% of your lending book, is because if we commit to do it means we have to deliver. We do not want to backpedal. Put our money where our mouth is. Deliver, like I said, our own building is green, right? That's us putting a commitment out there. Then we move with scope 3, working with our customers. All right, we've gone past scope 1, scope 2, now our scope 3 is our finance admission. How do we work with our customers? So I think I'll probably just stop there, otherwise we'll be sitting here the whole day, right?
Thank you so much, Wei Wei. Omar, if you could just wrap very quickly, please.
30 seconds. Just quickly on the point on energy, I think, and coal. Sitting in the policymakers' shoes, I think the issues with respect to energy is about solving for sustainability, obviously, security and affordability. That's a big thing. So the other one I'd add on is also in terms of the risks associated with operating certain types of power. So just on coal, I think the early termination of coal is clear that we need to get that done. And it's about finding structures whereby we can compensate for that loss in time, being able to generate energy, power and money. On your point on carbon credits, the issue today, this is my point, where I think governments have not been doing enough to shape the conversation. So for example, moving from coal to gas generates no carbon credit, despite seeing a 50% reduction in emission. You can only generate carbon credits if you go from coal to renewables. And as we know, renewables cannot be scaled fast enough. The issue about security and consistency of supply is a problem, unless it's hydro, for example. And of course, the cost of renewables, affordability cannot be solved. So this is the point of perfect being the enemy of good. I think my perspective on this, direction of travel is important. We should encourage coal to gas as an intermediate transition when we have better technology, more consistency of supply, etc. We can move to renewables. And if we can get that done, we can generate the carbon credits, we can move away from coal. In respect of policy for HSBC, our coal stance is very clear, it's on our website, etc. We've taken a hard position on coal. Very quickly on nuclear, I think I think nuclear is the right way forward to some extent. The qualification, of course, is in terms of the risk around nuclear, in terms of being able to operate it safely, being able to train people safely, and of course, we can't run away. Voters don't like it sometimes, being next to a nuclear power plant. So I think it's for the government, again, to work towards that, solving that. In terms of forestry, very quickly, I think HSBC is very, very supportive of the conservation of efforts around forestry. Nature-based solutions is critical. I think obviously we do have to deal with some of the problems because there has been issues of double counting, the issues of investing in a sort of a conservation project and then seeing the condominium being built. So, that's something we need to address, but I think if we can work together towards that, I think nature-based solutions are an important aspect of moving the world forward on climate change. Thank you.
Great insights from our 3 bank CEOs. Thank you so much.
Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Let's give a big hand. Thank you for moderating this session. Thank you once again to our esteemed panel of speakers. All 3 are just amazing and wonderful sharing indeed. Now, before we proceed moving forward with the next panel discussion, just gonna let them take a photo real quick. This is an amazing lineup of panelists. There we go. Amazing lineup of panel right here. All right, and to those of you who are currently tuning in virtually, we hope that you are also eager to have our next session coming up shortly after this. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you open up your WOVA app, of course, we will do our very best to tend to the questions that are being submitted on the WOVA app. All you have to do is launch the WOVA app head towards the session Q&A after clicking on our event. Take a look at the question Q&A and look for certain sessions, and I believe our panel as well as speakers will do their very best to address those questions. All right, there we go. Ladies and gentlemen, let's move forward, and we shall continue with our second panel discussion for today, for the title, focusing on case studies on increasing resilience. Ladies and gentlemen, this session will be led by the Director of Climate Governance Malaysia as the moderator. So let's welcome Dr. Gary Teixeira once again. There we go. Now, along with our panelists, allow me to introduce the panel for this session, starting with an industry leader that has garnered over 30 years of experience within the insurance and financial service sector under his belt. We have the country Chief Executive Officer of Zurich Insurance Company. Let's give a big hand to Mr. Junior Cho. Our second panelist has over 2 decades of experience in the risk management and insurance industry, in which he has developed innovative strategies that enhance decision-making and risk mitigation for various industries. We have Brad Weir, Head of Analytics Asia at Aon. Let's give a big hand. And finally, our final panelist has worked with a large spectrum of clients with over 17 years of experience in market-facing roles in sales, credit underwriting, consulting, strategy, and M&A integration across geographies. Let's welcome with a big hand Devpriya Misra, Global Customer Solutions Leader of Swiss Re Corporate Solutions. Dr. Gary, the floor is all yours. Best of luck.
Best of luck. Wow. Okay. No, I think we've. Okay. First thing, I need to apologize. This is a manhole rather than a panel, so we're still working on getting that straight. You know, but we go where we are led. The other thing you'll notice is none of us are wearing a tie. So bankers, you know, yeah. Okay. So, but what we're dealing with is a world at greater risk. And this risk has got to be managed. Either you do it yourself within your own corporate structure, your boundaries, whatever, or at some point you need to deal with that risk through insurance. So most of us have a love-hate relationship with insurance, right? We buy it in the hopes that we'll never have to use it, right? But I think when it comes to climate, the interesting thing is that we've got under our regulatory frameworks the fact that the insurance industry is grouped together with the finance industry, and we tend to sometimes think about these things as being somewhat similar across. So, for example, we have financed emissions. Now we have insurance-associated emissions, and the ways of trying to understand that, and then extending into reinsurance. But I'd like to give our panelists at the very outset between 2 and 5 minutes to expand a little bit on what their respective firms are involved in this insurance sphere, so that we all can be a bit of a common footing before we move forward. So I'd like to begin with Junior, if you would. Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Dr. Gary, and I'm happy to be here to share some of our learnings and what we've done from Zurich. For Zurich being a global insurer, I mean, we've seen globally escalating kind of impact related to climate change. And it's quite profound in terms of what we're seeing. Typically, you would say, well, that's not going to happen here. Actually, what we're seeing is that it's right at our doorstep. And when we look at what's been happening, if you just dial back for the last 3-4 years, we did a study with the World Economic Forum in 2024 with the Global Risk Report, and 2/3 of the respondents said that extreme weather was a top risk for 2024. And if you look at the top 4 risks over the next 10 years, they're all climate related. Now, why this is becoming important for us at Zurich, Malaysia, we've had a very strong position in terms of our stand for what we can do for sustainability. But if we bring it back to home, here in Malaysia, I think many of you knew about the 2021 floods, right? There was about 6.6 billion ringgit in economic losses. Insurance and tackle operators lost about 2.2 billion, and it's not getting any easier. If you recall the uprooted trees in downtown KL, you see a lot of the flooding downtown. It was quite surprising. Now, I've been in Malaysia for about 10 years, and the frequency and the intensity is something that's scary. Why this has become even more personal is I've had staff, customers, and partners, employees that were greatly affected dramatically. So for us, our goal is we're in the business of providing protection and peace of mind. So what can we do to employ best practices around underwriting to be more sophisticated in protecting our customers? But also, how do we use our asset management, our funds that we invest in companies, investees, borrowers, issuers, to influence them in terms of moving in the right direction? And I think the last thing is, as insurers, as people who live in the communities, what is it that we're doing outside the business of selling insurance to really influence adoption and also impact? So whether it is someone who's a proponent from the industry standpoint, from associations, or whether we make deliberate investments to do more social awareness and partnering with companies like Gentari to do something that's not related to insurance, but really amplifying that voice on behalf of the industry, but also for the country in terms of making that progress.
Yeah, thanks so much for starting us off. I'd like to pass it to Brad. You work in a slightly different sphere, perhaps overlapping, but in this area of brokerage between insurance companies and reinsurers. Could you introduce us to that landscape, if you would?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for that, Gary. So it's actually quite interesting that I sit in between my two colleagues, because that's effectively the role I play on the broking side of the business, in the sense that we are risk advisors and we're helping to transfer risks from one party to another. A big part of that is what I specialize in, is around risk understanding and natural catastrophe risk modeling. And that's obviously very critical when we talk about in context of climate. So we talked about the Malaysia floods back in December 2021, obviously a key thing for all of us as part of this industry. But so what we do is we develop models, and have been doing that for over 10 years around flood in Asia, to help understand and measure that risk. But that kind of lends its hand to a static view, because generally what we're interested in, the current day view of risk. But looking forward, and the need to look forward now, is around how do we address climate change and build that into the models that we have, and therefore understand the risk going forward. And there's a few reasons why we want to do that. One is around regulatory concerns. Obviously, as an industry, we want to become more resilient. So we need to stress test our portfolios, we need to stress test our business and understand if there is a flood and the flood is changing over time, what does that look like for us, and how do we account for that from a business perspective? And is our risk transfer mechanisms in place? Are they sufficient and resilient to what we expect to happen in the future? So this is a very new area. While catastrophe models have been around for many decades to help transfer and mitigate risk, embedding climate change in those models is relatively new space and developing space. And we have models that help do that now in places like Malaysia and help answer these types of questions. But it goes beyond just insurance as well. We had obviously a few banks that were well represented earlier. So that's obviously another area where we're seeing an interest. Banks, real estate investment groups who have a long-term view of risk, need to hold on to a risk for a large length of time and invest into that. They want to know how climate change is going to develop and impact them as well. So we're seeing the adaptation and application of these models perhaps extending even further into different industries.
Thanks so much, Brad. Then, of course, moving logically to the third phase of this, in other words, who insures the insurers? And we have Dev here from Swiss Re. Of course, would you introduce the area of course, it's been around for a while, but how is it evolving in terms of climate risk? Yeah.
Sure. Well, thanks, Brad and Gary. Let me start with Swiss Re. We are a 160-year organization, right? And we've been modeling climate natural catastrophes But it was 45 years ago in 1979 when climate change was introduced as a topic of concern at Swiss Re. So that's how far ahead we started to think about it. We really look to first, I think we start with quantification. We want to understand what the current risk looks like today. And if you observe, let's start with data, right? Since 2017, insured losses have gone over $100 billion. They keep increasing year after year, and we observe two things. First is the frequency of events is a lot more. The severity of events is a lot more. And they are coming up much higher than what it was originally modeled for. So since 2017 until 2023, we have observed every year more than $100 billion of insured losses. And on top of that, what we also observe is that the gap between real economic losses and the insured losses is widening. So there is a protection gap which exists out there. Now, as an organization, we have both hats. We play the reinsurer hat. We also play the insurer hat. And that's where we've started to also work very closely with our clients, with corporate partners, with multilateral institutions, with governments in providing risk protection solutions, risk transfer solutions, alternative risk transfer ways for protection. But something else is what we did. What we did a few years ago. We said we have a view of risk. We are starting to see a view of risk, and we are also able to predict what we see from our models, how climate change would look like. And we said, let's start to offer that view to all our clients, to the world outside. So the view that an underwriter at Swiss Re had in being able to model and understand climate change risk is the view of risk data that we start to then offer to corporates and clients across the world. And that was the ability to give people the power to take control of their risk, so that when they realize that they have a portfolio, a vulnerability in their portfolio, an asset or a certain locations, then they can start to do something about it, rather than wait 15 years or 20 years to find out that that was extremely vulnerable. And there are a lot of applications that we start to see about it, but it's really about not just only providing data, but really making data accessible to others so that good decision-making can happen.
Yeah, thank you very much, gentlemen. I think it's been a good introduction to the background of all this. The next step, obviously, thank you very much for sharing that you are now making that information and modeling information, scenarios, etc., available to stakeholders to begin thinking about their own investments in resilience, etc. Perhaps three of you could help us paint a picture of. We will get to the underinsured and the gap in a little bit, but we'd like to know and understand, perhaps demystify for us how you sort of aggregate or disaggregate, as the case may be, within your portfolio, clients who may be at greater risk, greater vulnerability, perhaps those less exposed, and those who may not have very, very little exposure, even within the same sector. So you might have the same type of factory, maybe it's an E&E factory in an area that's not vulnerable versus slightly vulnerable versus one. And the idea I wanted to get to is this idea that was earlier in the banking discussion, loans that not bankable, somewhat bankable, difficult to bank, and then those that are clearly bankable. Now, it's the opposite in this case. If you have low risk, then you might not want insurance at all, and the insurance companies might not be interested in it because it's too much paperwork for the premium, which might be too low. So where are these breakpoints, and what kinds of information do you use to apply to your portfolio to engage with your clients about who falls where, and later on next we'll move to about what I can do to move maybe from one category to another as a client. Perhaps we could begin with Junior?
Sure. So as an insurer, there's a couple of things we look at. One is the underwriting guidelines. So things that fall within risk appetite and things that do not. So things, for example, coal, we have a clear stance. We do not, we walk away. So there are clear delineations of things that we choose to do and not do. Now, there are risks that we do work with our clients, and when we do that, there are 3 services that we offer. We have something called Zurich Resilience Services. This idea is to help clients in their transition or to be aware of the things that they need to do to move into that transition. So that's a separate service that we provide. It's not an insurance product. It's an independent service that is provided, and I'm sure that Aon and Swiss Re do have similar services. I think for when we are looking to assess risk, there are a couple of things that we do, right? One is the flood data, as an example that the panelists have talked about, are accessible where we assess the likelihood and the risk profile of that. And that will then be in such granular detail that to the postcode, we're able to, at least at an address, we can see what that exposure is. But there's another element of doing site surveys, right? So you would visit the site surveys to assess to see whether they have appropriate measures and make recommendations of how they could protect themselves better in the event. Because sometimes the data will present historical, and there are some predictive models, but as we all know, it's very unpredictable in terms of where it may happen. So we want to make sure that if the data shows predictability, how do you become well prepared? So we offer those types of service, and then in aggregate, then give that advice that we need to support. Now, that's the first aspect of providing protection. I think as an insurer, why do people get insurance? They want to make sure that we're able to deliver on the claim at the time of an untoward event. So the other thing that we do look at is what are the measures that we need to do to simplify the claims process for something as simple as SMEs to as complex as large corporates, especially when these events do occur. So the other thing that we do look at is how do we make sure that that customer experience is much more in tuned to the needs of that customer at the time or that moment that crisis occurs.
Thanks, Brad.
Yeah, so I guess it's a little bit different for me in that place because as the role of the risk advisor, we're not necessarily carrying risk. But I guess it's a critical part of what we do is to help communicate and help to justify what we talked about here in terms of information that's flowing through. So if we're trying to understand flood risk, for instance, we will analyse a portfolio and we'll take a look at it and say which areas are flooding and why, and what's the nature of that to the particular portfolio. Is it a particular type of risk? Is that information being represented correctly? Is there something better we can do about this? Is it relevant within the context of the model that we're using as well, which is very important, because if a model is not designed relevant to the risk that's localised in terms of the context, let's say Malaysia, then you might be looking at information that's incorrect. So understanding the impact that the information is very important. The old saying, data in, or garbage in, garbage out, in terms of how you use the information is critical, particularly in this place. So we do a lot of work around understanding that and making sure that the information that is used and communicated is relevant, because it's very important, because all the decisions are based off that. So that's probably one of the key areas. The other aspect too is we're seeing, on a number of angles, the frequency of things increasing, particularly around flood. Companies are looking to take that information in-house and understand it and use it in the way that Junior was saying in terms of how do I underwrite this risk? Is it an area which is going to cause me a problem, or am I pricing it accordingly? Is the coverage relevant for the person? Is there something they can be doing that will then feed in and change my holistic portfolio view? So that's another area that we're seeing an increase in particular.
Thanks, Brad. Anything else to add, Dev?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll add a couple of dimensions. So what we start to do is, for every client, think of a Google Map version of a digital twin of their portfolio. We help them build their portfolio to really identify which are your vulnerable sites, so they can really understand at each asset level what is the expected loss that we are, based on probabilities of what's the likelihood of a certain event to happen. And that starts to then drive action, right? Because you are going to put a higher weight on if you start to see actually this location of mine is driving my insurance premiums more, and maybe I need to take more risk engineering actions out there. We need to do all of those. So we really start to help clients understand that. Clients who start to go into areas like renewable energy, they want to go into solar, then they start to realize that hail is an issue. And then how do we really, act for it? Clients who go into offshore wind, There's so much know-how that insurers have from their learning of the various losses and events that have happened. So when clients are actually scaling up or getting into new areas or starting to come up with new investments, we play the role of really partnering with them in bringing this risk knowledge that can be translated into a lot more resilient asset or a portfolio that addresses the climate issues. Similar to banks, there's another thing which we've done. At Swiss Re, we've really committed to the net zero by 2050. So we've done it in two ways. First is on an operational basis. By 2030, we would be net zero. And from an underwriting portfolio, we will be net zero by 2050. And we've already started to implement that. So similar to what we heard in the banking panel, we have like thermal coal. We are not supporting that. We are transitioning. So each of the underwriting portfolios needs to align with risks that are coming in from corporations which are also on that net zero path, else they would not be in the portfolio in the future. So we've really taken a very similar view to banks, and in fact, we've kind of lead the way when it comes to insurance, because we feel that we need to play as insurance capacity, a key provider, also shape the way that the adoption of more greener transition and a just transition happens quicker.
May I get a clarification of it? When you speak about your clients, are you referring to the insurance side or the reinsurance side? Because it seems to me that your clients would actually be insurers. And is it the insurers that are going into this? And perhaps expand a little bit on how you share data between the reinsurer, yourselves, and your insurance clients, your insurer clients.
Yeah. So I today represent the corporate solutions side of Swiss Re, which is the direct insurance arm. So for us, clients are really the large corporates of the world. We have close to more than 12,000 large corporates across the world that Swiss Re Corporate Solutions insures. There is also the reinsurance arm of Swiss Re, which works with the likes of Zurich and many others. But at the same time, when it comes to risk knowledge sits at a group level and it's shared across. But when it comes to underwriting information, that there is a Chinese wall, so we don't get to see and do share that or look at it. But the learnings that come when it comes to understanding of what the what's the probability of an event happening in a certain place, from a hurricane risk or a flood risk or an earthquake, all of that is available at a group level, and it's same and it's shared across the organization.
Right. Thank you very much. It's not very often that you have experts from the insurance industry up here. So please do use the Hoover app. Do send your questions in. In fact, I know for a fact, because I've had some conversations in the hallways, that there are some people here from the insurance industry, and you do have questions about this. I'd like perhaps to move a little bit into the ways in which, get a little bit more granular on the ways through which you engage and interact with clients, like I said, who might be perhaps on the cusp of being on one side or the other side of a particular situation. Perhaps they're looking at how they could possibly reduce premiums by taking actions, by investments that would either decrease their risk or de-risk some parts of their operations, etc., or perhaps try to work with other organizations. For example, I happen to know in the Shah Alam area there are 3 developers who are actually in competition with each other in terms of development, but they're all exposed and vulnerable to floods in that Shah Alam area. And in fact, they're working together, collaborating to work with the government agency in charge of flood mitigation to try to sort of decide, which developer might dedicate land to impoundments, water storage, in the event of floods, which and how to share that burden out, so that ultimately all of them end up de-risking as a group. But perhaps some clarification on how you are engaging with your clients to actually advise them, given the fact that you've got these models, etc. Do you get into the tech? Do you get into the engineering? At what level do you collaborate on this? I don't know, Brad, you want to go
Maybe I can just
Yeah.
quickly kick off. I think there's multiple levels in terms of the engagement piece, and it depends sometimes on the sophistication of the client that you're working with and what solution you're trying to come up with. So it can vary a lot because we do work across, or I work across multiple different groups in terms of not just insurance, so corporates and banks and so on. So it can be that we do some analysis, we identify key challenges or risks, but then we engage with our engineering group as well, so risk engineering people, who might then go and deploy an on-ground survey to understand the risk better, or we may actually just have discussions directly with the client around that. And then we take that information and we build it back in again and review how that might change, particularly if they do have something around mitigation as an example, or whether they're planning to do something in the future around mitigation. Then we're actually able to represent that and do that and then say, okay, well, that's the impact that it has, and therefore how do we design or come up with a solution to transfer that risk if it's necessary. So there is that interaction discussion, but it does depend a little bit on the sophistication and how far a particular company is looking to dig into that. As I mentioned before, some will actually take modelling as an example and take it in-house. So they will have the expertise in-house, or they might engage other partners in the industry, like we've been talking about, in terms of understanding more and then educating themselves on the ground as well.
Anything to add, either Junior or Deb? Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe a couple of examples. What we've started to do with a lot of clients is really look into their supply chain resilience and how it impacts business interruption, which would be climate related. Because we've all, throughout the COVID pandemic, realized that supply chain resilience has been a concern, but really now starting to look at supply chain resilience from a climate perspective and start to tell them where in their portfolio lie vulnerabilities that they plan for. We have clients who are investing in new assets. So again, with the platform that we started to share with the Risk Data Services platform, they've started to use it. A lot of clients, including sovereign wealth funds and some others, are now integrating it as part of their investment committee decisions. Is that the right asset? And we also started to partner with the first adaptation finance guide that we did together with Standard Chartered Bank, where it was really around how could adaptation finance be brought in, and including alternative ways of risk transfer, where traditional risk transfer is not available, but you could end up protecting through parametric kind of solutions where based on observable parameters, there is a payout that is done. To give you an example, in New York, there are vulnerable communities. So we partnered with the New York government and we came up with a flood protection parametric insurance that would get money paid to the vulnerable communities. So it's again bringing lots of these ideas, but ultimately what insurance does is it gives you a signal on price. Price would go up if the risk starts to become very uninsurable because we start to see the expected loss from a location, and that should start to drive behavior. Now, in certain cases, the price would go up more in the future, and we are trying to now tell people, why don't you model and see what it means for you in the future now, rather than wait to find that out 10 years later. So, and there are proactive boards who are trying to identify vulnerabilities in their portfolio, and then there are others who are more doing it as part of their regulatory requirements that are driven by some of the regulatory reasons.
Perhaps where there are no existing regulations, do you engage if you perceive that there is a benefit for your clients to move into a particular area and get those things covered? How do you... We can look at this as this insurance gap now. Perhaps maybe a good time to move into that. Of course, the industry is once again finding out that when the industry finds out about the gaps, they find out about it the hard way. Right? It's like, I should have had this insured, kind of deal. But Brad, perhaps not counting on you to lead all the time, but perhaps does the insurance industry actually, are they proactive in terms of helping clients or potential clients, prospective clients, point out, identify areas where they perhaps should be advised to be covered? Or is this something that you normally wait for your clients to have that go through that painful process and then later on decide? Is there any proactive action in that regard?
I think at a higher level, definitely there's a lot of work that gets done in Asia in particular, because the gap is so big. And we work closely with groups like the World Bank to help understand the risk, and then use that information to talk to governments to say, how do we help the vulnerable in terms of providing some form of protection? Because it's not always easy to provide affordable protection to fully reinstate, say, a physical risk if it's damaged, but you can certainly look at measures, and parametric was suggested, to help provide capital injection in times of emergency to help vulnerable communities. So that's definitely it's something it's been going for some time, and it will continue to do. There's a lot of discussion. It's a lot of work, because you need to do a lot of work to understand the risk. You then need to convince the relevant parties to invest, the relevant stakeholders to invest and come up with a solution that's affordable and amenable. So there's a lot of work that's been done in that place, and it's not just developing communities or vulnerable communities. You can look at a place like Australia, where they've developed a pool for cyclone risk as an example, because of the cost has increased. So they're trying to mitigate some of that cost by pooling the risk together and developing solutions that are not for profit. So that's not a developing country. That's a country where the insurance penetration is relatively good, but it's addressing a slightly different problem.
Yeah, perhaps, Debbie, you mentioned that you already work with governments, and so perhaps having government representatives here, I think be good to hear and to understand perhaps the linkage between the insurance industry, the banking regulators that actually produce some of the regulations that may link insurance with banking requirements. All right. How close is that relationship in terms of you working with government and more specifically government regulators to help them understand where there should be regulations requiring coverage, requiring protection, requiring risk mitigation? Any views on that?
So one of the observations, so we have this publication called Sigma, right, which every year starts to show the difference between economic losses and insured losses. And it's really been widening a lot since the start of 2000. You start to see every year it's widening. And one of the things that Swiss Re did back in 2010, we were the first major reinsurer to form a team dedicated to public sector, which was to work with, whether it's the multilaterals from the World Bank to the IFC to the ADBs to the local banks to many other state institutions. It was all around focusing on bringing public-private partnership solutions when it comes to the insurance sector, with the goal of closing the protection gap. Because we believe that is so important. And this team has really been at every major forum trying to show what the vulnerabilities are there, how you can protect. I personally, back in almost 2013, worked on, we did the NatCat swap with the World Bank to protect the Pacific Islands. So there was, if there was a major hurricane or a certain flood event or an earthquake, there would be a payout that would be made available, and that would be available to really help some of the most vulnerable communities. So there are a lot of these solutions out there, including now we've even supported a pandemic bond as well, to start to give you a flavor. So it's an area where we take very seriously. We've put almost a pretty big team globally around it to bring all of Swiss Re's expertise. And we believe it's not just Swiss Re, we really need an entire industry-wide effort. So that's where the Aons, the Zurichs, and everybody else is invited, and they all are participating in many of these transactions and opportunities. But we believe that this is a space where more needs to be done to really close that protection gap.
Anyone want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, it echoes for us at Zurich also. That protection gap, the insurance industry is not going to be able to do it alone, nor would the financial services industry. And I think the public and private partnership is crucial, and everyone needs to play a role. Now, the problem is that that's the issue when it happens. So one of the ways that we can kind of mitigate that is to work on a more preventative, proactive approach. So part of the issue is driving more awareness and people to be mindful that these risks can apply to them and to their businesses. I think the example that UOB had with this compass, we are launching one with a bank partner. It's the ESG barometer, and it's supposed to help SMEs realize where are they in that journey to be more resilient against ESG risks. And we did a study, and the study shows that maybe 4 years ago, SMEs, about 22% of them were aware of what the impacts were. In the latest study, it's now up to 80%. So the more that we can do to help drive more awareness so people can take more proactive actions to prevent any of these scenarios or scenes happening to them would help address some of the issues that we're seeing with the protection gap, right? In addition to the public and private partnerships.
Well, thanks very much. I see 5 minutes remaining on the clock, and I'd really like to give the audience an opportunity to interact directly with the panel. Any questions from the floor? Please, go ahead, yeah.
There's an association of insurance companies called the Net Zero Insurance Alliance. I don't remember whether you are in or out or have withdrawn, and of late a number, I think a third of members have withdrawn from this organization because of allegations by certain elected officials in the United States that decisions such as the ones that you described of withholding insurance coverage from the coal sector, for example, is anti-competitive, and therefore that by being part of an industry association, you are engaging in collusion and denial of access to services. So I just wondered how you are managing that threat of enforcement actions, however justified they may or may not be.
So Zurich was on that alliance, was one of the starters. And regrettably, we did have to step away based on legal advice on the implications of the threats you've talked about. So that's a reality. However, it does not diminish the ambition that we still have to play a role. So we would still be active in playing that roles in the jurisdictions that we operate, and also making sure that we have a global approach, but also a hyper-local, kind of localized mindset. So, and those are the challenges that we have, and this is why I think governments need to play a more active role with the industries to helping to open up and remove those threats or barriers so that we can be more productive in making the impact that we can do as an industry. But yeah.
Anything else to add?
Yeah, so Swiss Re was also part of that alliance. We no longer are part of that alliance. But more importantly, it doesn't change our net zero commitments. I think we believe in it. It's our mission to partnering for progress to make the world more resilient. And we are very transparent around our policies, whether it's an oil and gas policy, whether it's a coal policy, it's out in the public domain. We openly talk about it. We explain how we look at it in our underwriting portfolio, the rationale behind it. So we believe that there are actions that we need to take as an organization to make the world more resilient and to be on that net zero path. And that is how we drive our actions.
All right, the next question, we have someone. Yeah, go ahead, please, sir. Oh, okay, I thought you were waiting in line to ask a question. Sorry. Questions, anyone else from the floor? All right, well, perhaps if there are no questions, maybe we can just have some very brief closing remarks on perhaps how you see us moving forward. I think that area is an important one. On the one hand, we've had banks say that, well, I gave up this particular loan opportunity just to have somebody else pick it up. And if that happens, you haven't moved the needle on the emissions. On the other hand, trying to remain engaged and collaborating might actually result in greater emissions reductions as we navigate this transition. Perhaps, gentlemen, you'll be able to close with a very brief summary, perhaps, or your final thoughts might be on where the insurance industry has a role to play in helping us with this transition. Is it something that we need to make a clean break from, or is it something that we can remain engaged with and help, using a stick or a carrot to move the needle? Maybe we can go in the opposite order. Dev, you begin?
Yeah, I think there's one message I'd like to really have the audience take back. It's about take control of your risk. Visualization is very powerful. When sometimes you look at your current portfolio today, it might look green, it might not look at risk. But when you start to switch on the future layers, you start to see the ambers and the reds, and then how a lot of vulnerability exists. And it changes behavior, because when you observe, you get concerned and you start to do something about it today. So the message is visualize. There are lots of tools available out there to start to visualize what could happen and take action for it. That's how you take control of your risk to build more resilience.
Thanks, Dev. Brad?
I think it's pretty much to reiterate the same point. It's not difficult to have a good understanding of what's going to happen and how to stress test what you do as a business. And it's certainly changing. I've seen so much more engagement in the past 5 years, and some of it's regulatory driven, which is understandable, but that's a good thing because it's bringing resilience. So, ask the partners that you work with how they can help you, because there is plenty of good information, there's plenty of ways to look at it. And to understand and know is, empowers you to be able to do something going forward as well.
Junior?
Yeah, I echo with everyone else what they're saying, but I think it's a multifaceted approach, and the idea is to remain committed and true and see for the long term. And I think the most important thing is that we need to come together more as an industry, but also with the public sector to really make a meaningful impact. I think there's been great progress, but certainly there's much more to be done. So, yeah.
So please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists for a wonderful overview of insurance.
There we go. Thank you, Dr. Tessera, Mr. Cho, Mr. Weir, Mr. Misra. Go ahead and stand up and let's take a group photo on stage. There we go. Before we move on to our next session. Wonderful session indeed. Now, of course, as mentioned, ladies and gentlemen, we do realize that there are some questions via the WOVA app, but again, we will do our very best. The panel and also the speakers will do their very best to address those questions. But if they happen to miss it out, don't worry. You may find some chance, find some opportunity to meet up with them and forward your questions directly to them. Now, ladies and gentlemen, moving forward, we have a brief message to be shared by a special guest. But before that, Yang Berbahagia Dato, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today and gracing our event here with your presence. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a brief message to be shared by Yang Berbahagia Dato Johan Mahmud Merican, Secretary General of the Treasury at the Ministry of Finance, Malaysia. Can we give him a big hand, please?
Thank you. Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and a very good morning. Salam sejahtera, salam Malaysia Madani. Datin Sri, Sunita, thank you so much for inviting me to join you. Obviously a great conference that you've organized, great speakers like what we saw on the panel earlier. Very much honored given this opportunity. Maybe just to speak, I think we probably were all amongst the converted, but certainly climate change is not just an environmental issue just for environmentalists. It's certainly something that affects all of us. It's certainly increasingly a business and economic imperative, and hence really something, a priority for the government. And so for my brief remarks today, I hope to just cover three main points. I think first is really the need to accelerate reform. The second one, maybe just touching in terms of the commitment that at least the government, particularly including the Ministry of Finance, is taking in terms of really supporting this agenda. And really the third, looking forward, so it's really the role of the private sector working with the government to advance action against climate change. In terms of reform, ladies and gentlemen, as you're familiar, Yang Muhammad Prime Minister has launched the Economy Madani as part of the umbrella of the reform agenda, which speaks about having to raise the ceiling in terms of restructuring the economy, including on a more sustainable basis, raising the floor, ensuring that those benefits accrue to the rakyat inclusively, and also in terms of the governance framework that underpins all of this. And as you know, Madani itself, the M stands for Mampan, or when it's translated to English script, sustainability. So it shows you how it's top of mind for the Prime Minister, having sustainability as a key anchor for the reform agenda. And certainly some of the very positive macro results that we are seeing of late. So we're seeing in terms of GDP growth, we've seen it go from 4.2% in the first quarter to 5.9% in the second quarter. We're certainly, I'm sure colleagues from Bank Negara are happy that they don't get always asked what's happening to the ringgit. Certainly it's a bit of a happier front at the moment as it's in the 4.3 range. Bursa having crossed 1,600 indices. Whilst these positive developments, I would say not accidental, I think some of it certainly does refer to some of the early fruits from reform undertaken by the government. Sometimes I think the government has been a bit less than popular, whether in terms of fiscal reform, committing to a consolidation of our fiscal deficit. In 2022 it was 5.6, it was reduced to 5% in 2023, and this year we're targeting 4.3%, and for budget 2025 certainly a continued consolidation of that deficit, in line with our commitment under the Fiscal Responsibility Act to achieve at least 3% in the medium term. But closer to the topic of sustainability, the government has also undertaken an approach of targeted subsidies, starting with electricity, water, and obviously most recently this year on diesel. And the approach taken really, for example, in terms of electricity, is ensuring that those larger organizations, homes consuming high amounts of electricity are paying much closer to the market price, whilst the government continues to provide assistance to lower income and lower consumption, whether businesses or homes. Similarly, the approach taken on diesel was to then take the diesel pump price from where it was at 215 ringgit per litre, right up to what was the unsubsidized price of 3 ringgit and 35 cents per litre back in June. Obviously, since then, oil prices have come off a bit, and we're, right now at 316. But the point was to take the pump price right to market and providing the right market signals. Certainly, when some ask me about carbon taxes, it's very difficult to talk about carbon taxes when we effectively have a negative tax on fuel, and certainly that was part of ensuring that it was at market price the right incentives, but at the same time ensuring that we protected the poor by having some cash assistance for individual car owners, and also in terms of providing some assistance for logistics to ensure that the cost of goods were not unduly affected. But certainly the belief is that through this action of reforms, whether it was the fiscal consolidation, and certainly in terms of the action taken on subsidies, that certainly has improved and increased business confidence, investor confidence. MITI reported that for the first 6 months of 2024, approved investments had achieved 180 billion, an 18% increase over the corresponding period last year. And that confidence does come back towards the fact that government is taking action on the sustainability front. And I think that should bode a lesson, I think, for all of us, that reforms on sustainability is a payback, especially when we still hear many Malaysian organizations, perhaps those amongst the SMEs, who sometimes still see action on sustainability or climate transition as a luxury, a necessity, or even burdensome in terms of additional costs. And I think the experience of the Malaysian government, at least in terms of the early fruits that we've seen in terms of macro and investor confidence, should then perhaps give a good lesson in that it certainly does have a payback or return on investment, starting on this journey of reform towards greater sustainability. That's really in terms of my first point about the value of reform, and obviously the need to continue to accelerate that reform. Certainly with the upcoming budget, which will be tabled by Yang Amat Prime Minister in 18th of October, we certainly look forward to see what more we, particularly in the Ministry of Finance and Government, can do to further accelerate reform to support the need for climate action. Thus far, the Ministry of Finance have obviously undertaken various interventions to promote climate action, whether it's through funding, taxation, grants or policies. It was interesting to hear in the previous panel talking a lot about floods. Certainly, this is where I guess government needs to step in whether there are market failures. Certainly, we saw perhaps that it's underdeveloped. I think flood insurance, particularly for the agricultural sector, I think that's where the government is committed to work with AgroBank, at least to seed an initial flood insurance for farming sector. But talking in terms of some of the key levers in terms of financing, the government itself has issued sustainability sukuks totaling about 13 billion, at least over the last 3 years. Beyond our own issuances, we're certainly also supporting financing done by the private sector. We have schemes, for example, like the Green Technology Financing Scheme, which provides a guarantee of between 60 to 80% on top of a interest rebate of about 1.5%. Bank Negara itself provides subsidized funds for transition, which is lent through the banking sector. In addition to that, Ministry of Finance also introduced a government green procurement policy, perhaps still in its infancy, but at least we're happy to note that we've thus far already achieved at least 1.7 billion worth of procurement under green products and services. In terms of tax, we obviously have introduced a certain number of tax incentives, the green investment tax allowance, green investment tax exemption, for example, even facilitating for companies to adopt solar energy for own use, whether it's for more sustainable green management, waste management. And in terms of also, I guess, some in this room probably also benefit from the tax exemption on EVs, which again is part of recognizing that it's a key sector for emissions. But beyond what we can give out in terms of whether it's financing, tax incentives, one of the areas that we look forward to in Budget 2025 is also certainly how shall we deepen partnerships. There are various areas we've initiated partnerships. One area is at least introducing in 2019 what we call ecological fiscal transfer, ensuring that part of the grants that are given to the state governments are tied to sustainability efforts being undertaken at the state level, and we've consistently been increasing our allocation under our ecological fiscal transfer to the state governments. Another area is the collaborations with United Nations in terms of some of the seed projects, pilot projects that we're undertaking. I think Malaysia is very blessed that we have beautiful tropical island and we have wonderful resorts, but we still have resorts owners who are just operating perhaps less sustainably, in terms of open burning of waste, or even just, having the waste being floats right into the sea. We were then piloting with them, what can we do which perhaps partners with communities, partners with business owners that promotes sustainability, and if successful, we can scale up. And these are areas that we're keen to do, working with partners, whether in the private sector or a civil society. And I think it's on that note, to transition maybe on the third area, which I wanted to touch on, is in terms of the role of private sector and working together. Certainly in terms of engagements, we know that there are certainly huge requirements, such as in terms of to meet the needs of the NETR, the National Energy Transition Roadmap. It's estimated that even up to 300 billion will be needed by 2030 to meet the needs. This is where the Ministry of Finance, particularly it's a focus area for Yang Berhormat Minister of Finance too, to initiate a focus by the GLICs, or the government-linked investment companies. They've announced a commitment to invest over 120 billion over the next 5 years in domestic direct investments in strategic areas, and certainly one of the strategic areas is energy transition, not just in terms of increasing renewable energy capacity, but certainly there's a lot more of investments are required in terms of reinforcing the grid to support such a transition. Beyond what's done, by the likes of TNB, as many are aware, Petronas through Gentari has also increased its commitment investments in renewables. And I guess there's a lot more that can even be done just to even promote renewable energies among households. With the falling prices of solar panels, increasingly solar on rooftops are becoming increasingly viable. But are we in government, in private sector, sufficiently responding and providing the due incentives, whether it is rebates or tax incentives, or even the fact of financing, given that sometimes impediment would be the upfront costs required to put up solar on rooftops. But these are areas that we hope to look forward for partnerships. What are innovations that private sector can offer as the government-linked investment companies are committed to increase our investment, particularly in supporting whether it's public-private partnerships or just pure investments in transition in order for Malaysia to meet increasingly its goals eventually to be net zero. I trust that Datin Sri will share the key outcomes, maybe key proposals from this conference, and we look forward to perhaps considering and including some of that in our upcoming budget. But certainly it's a journey. We certainly have a lot more that we need to do, but on the part of government, I'd just like to reinforce there's certainly a commitment directly from Yang Mak Prime Minister in terms of the commitment to sustainability in the Madani framework, and which will certainly be reflected in the upcoming budget. And certainly we hope that with that commitment from government, we are able to invite, collaborate and partner with private sector towards ensuring that we continue to accelerate reform in this space, given, I think even as mentioned in the previous panel, it's not something distant or far away. It's right at our doorstep. It's happening today, and we need action today. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you very much, Yang Berbahagia, Secretary General. And ladies and gentlemen, we will now be taking a 10-minute break. Once again, a 10-minute tea break. So go ahead and enjoy the refreshments outside at the foyer. But please return in 10 minutes' time. Thank you very much. We'll see you soon. All right, ladies and gentlemen, once again, I'm not sure whether our guests outside of the foyer can hear me, but those of you who are outside of the foyer, please join us again inside the auditorium. We'll be starting momentarily. Thank you. And if you do have colleagues outside of the foyer, please ask them to join us as well. All right? And ladies and gentlemen, again, just a gentle reminder, because I'm sure today is a busy day for most of you. It's a Wednesday indeed. So please kindly switch your mobile phones to silent mode. And if there is any urgent call that you need to do, please do so outside of the foyer. Also, ladies and gentlemen, later on, we'll be having a bit of a survey that I would like to ask everyone to fill out. But this will be happening later. All right, we'd like to get your feedback and also some suggestions, if may, so that we can further improve the next summit. All right, this survey form will be shown to you later on after this. Oh, you can also fill it out right now. QR code is currently being shown on screen, so please, if you could do me the pleasure of scanning that QR code and fill out the survey form online, it would be fantastic. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I believe most of our guests are here. As I'm inviting our next speaker on, we can just still leave the QR code on screen for everyone to just fill out the survey form. And ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, allow me to introduce our next keynote speaker. Our next keynote speaker has more than 25 years work experience. She is the Senior Country Operations Officer of World Bank Malaysia for the title Economic Consequences of Climate Inaction, Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tan Mei Ling. Let's give her a big hand.
Thank you for having me here today. And it's my pleasure to share with you my presentation slides today that's entitled Lowering the Resource Curve, Making Development Work for People and the Planet. And we see many times it's the reverse. It's the people and planet that is working for economic development growth. Thank you. As this slide shows, and this is quite a powerful slide, because it shows that whilst population, the global population grows, GDP economic growth, but the material footprint, which is the extraction of raw natural materials out from the raw materials, is actually growing at a higher pace than global GDP and population growth. As you can see, if we continue on this upward trend, it's not sustainable. Is it possible to decouple material footprint growth from economic growth? And here, perhaps, I'd like to share that we can do this. Okay, having a bit of clicker, apologies for that. And whilst we take it down from the 30,000 feet, let's make it real, actionable, and practical. And I would like to walk you through end-to-end of the value chain to really see the bigger picture. But let's start with a simple example, plastics. I will take you through 3 examples and start off with plastics. And here you see is a picture I took in 2018 in a popular picnic spot in the weekend where there's lots of locals and there's lots of plastics and rubbish that's being thrown. And what's horrifying is to see that people are immune to the amount of plastic waste. They are immune. Next, fast forward, just 3 weeks ago, in Langkawi, and this is off the touristed islands, less touristed islands, and it's on a small uninhabited island. And as you can see here, it's plastics that's not just washed up, but it's also plastics that left by day picnickers. And Langkawi is one of the sites for ASEAN summits next year. So how did we get here? How do we get with all the plastics? We see plastics, we drink coffee and tea from jugs, but the water we need from plastic water bottles. We go to Kanduri weddings, parties, where there are 400-500 guests in a wedding party, and we have plastic water bottles. Even now in cafes and restaurants, we see sauces, the chili sauce, coming in plastic, and yet all the rest are served in plates. So the growth of plastics globally has been exponential. The chart on the left shows that in between 2000 and 2015, right, in 15 years, 44%, nearly half of the plastics that's ever manufactured in the world was done in 15 years. And now fast forward to 2024, is still on this upward exponential trend. And you can see the chart on the right, the pink is the plastics packaging. And the plastic packaging that we throw away, our convenience, including the plastic bottles, all the Milo sachets, the biscuits, etc. I use Milo just as an example, but if you go to any grocery and supermarket, everything is single sachets now. It's not in tins, it's in convenience. It has become mainstream in our lives, but in all sectors, in industrial, in machinery, in electrical appliances, plastics that you see in fridge, in the washing machine, in the toasters. So we have single-use plastic as well as durable plastics. I do need to get the, if the, sorry, okay. Where is this plastics and why is this crisis more important for Malaysia? As you can see the chart on the left, 2010 is old data, but it's still very interesting and important because in Asia Pacific, China was the highest. And before China constituted the ban of 2018, because they couldn't handle the overwhelming amount of plastics on their shores, so they had the ban. And guess where all the plastics waste went to? In Southeast Asia. And in 2025, it's projected that ASEAN will have the largest share of mismanaged plastics. And that's just next year. So as you can see, the plastic pollution problem is hurting our economy, ecotourism, in fisheries, in our health. Now plastics, microplastics is found in mother's breast milk. It affects climate and biodiversity. In terms of climate alone, the entire plastics production life cycle, because plastics is fossil fuel-based products, and if you go into the resin, the manufacturing, the transportation, right to the end of where it's being used in the various sectors, the amount of emission, if it continues on the trajectory that we have, by 2030 is equivalent to 295, nearly 300 coal plants. So as much as we can say we want to retire coal plants, this is the dark horse here. So let us segue now into energy. Right, and I like to use this because I find this inspiring and motivating, because we have a country, UK, that from 1970 until 2020 here, that the actual consumption of energy actually has reduced. And this is despite that their population has grown 20% and their economy has tripled in that same period. So they managed to reduce their energy consumption, and therefore their per capita emissions even has reduced even greater. Other countries have also done so, developed countries have also done so, as you can see from the chart on the right. And we can see there are various factors. Yes, there's a shift from manufacturing to services and to less energy intensive industries, market pricing, heavy investments in renewables. In UK, there's now 40% of the energy mix is renewables. But it's also they have energy efficiency in their building materials, in the way, and also the way they live. The consumer behavior is, there's a high education level. In the city of London alone, the last couple of years, it's now there are more cyclists in the city than there are cars, buses, and other vehicles, trucks, and all that. So actually, there are more cyclists. And so the progression of their journey towards lower energy consumption has been gradual but progressive. So let's look into Malaysia, right? And let's have a better look. We talk about energy and we think it's oil and gas, but really what does it really mean so that it becomes more specific and actionable? In Malaysia, the growth of energy since 1990, in this chart to 2018, is 6 times. So it's on a trajectory from 10,000 kilotons to 60 over 1,000, right? And the types of fossil fuels here that you see is petrol and petroleum products. You have electricity at 20%, gas at 29%. And where are these types of fuels being used in the various sectors? For example, in manufacturing, you have gas, you have electricity, and petroleum products to run its operations in factories, in machinery, in genset, and so on. In different sectors, you also have the use of the fossil fuels, the different fuel types, in the operations. So let us look into, perhaps take a closer look at transportation. Where is the highest at 36%? Maybe we just look at this as an example. And they did tell me to make it higher, and sometimes height has a certain disadvantage. So, so here, and if you look at transport, Malaysia has the dubious honor that we have the highest vehicle per capita in ASEAN. In 2021, there were more vehicles than the population of Malaysia. And in 2023, last year, when I checked yesterday, that 2022, 2023, 23 was the highest ever growth rate, sales, new vehicle sales. So we are adding more and more vehicles on the road, whether it's ICE or whether it's EV, we are still at the end of the day adding more vehicles on the road. What does that mean? And you can see for those who live in the urban KL Klang Valley, this one is an example that is near Mutiara Damansara. We see it in Kerinci, Bangsa South. We see it in Jalan Jelate, Ampang. We see it everywhere, right? We see highways, and what does that mean? The construction of this is more cement and more steel, more energy all along, the production. And cement, this is what it means doing to us in terms of the impact on our hills, and biodiversity is lost, and is lost forever. And here is really, we see that I give you an example also, maybe closer to my home, in Bukit Kiara, right? In the north of Kiara, there is been construction, property development, and the MP, who happens to be YB Minister Hannah Yeoh, says now the topsoil, the hills that's been cut, every time there's rain, there's floods 2-3 kilometers down the road in her kawasan. And then what she does, she gives cash assistance, and we talk about floods and flood mitigation measures, but this is the flood that has happened, right? And what we are doing is then perhaps we should look at the root causes of floods and mudslides. We see this in Janda Baik, we see this in Baling Kedah, in Kelantan, in many places. So, how do we then lower the resource curve? The only way to lower is to reduce. It's not reuse, nor even recycle, because recycle, again, also uses energy. And let's have some simple and practical solutions for plastics, lowering single-use plastics, the pink one, for example. We can stop. We can even just reduce by stopping unnecessary plastic water bottles and other plastic packaging. We think perhaps we don't make a difference, one person, but collectively, accumulatively, we have seen the exponential growth, and most of the plastic waste are not recycled. In fact, it's just in the environment. So if we can reduce, and even durable plastics, in EU and UK, they have made it mandatory by 2030, I think. It's that every single, the durable plastic must be made, every single fittings, fixtures, electrical appliances cannot be thrown away. And we are so used, if a single light is out, we throw the entire system away, right? And it's there's no more, why don't we repair? The TV is spoiled. After 3-4 years, we throw away the entire TV. We don't repair anymore. So the question is that here now, UK and EU is mandating to be able to repair and fix things. Implement and enforce the plastic sustainability roadmap. We have that roadmap. Let's implement and enforce it, and then empower our local councils. The revenue they collect, they keep. And the last one, increase recycling rate. Yesterday, someone says that we need to have imported because we don't have enough feedstock. I'll give you an example. There was also a question, how do we take it to the person, to the man on the ground? So in my condo, there was recycling bins, It was very far away outside in one end because it's easier for the trucks to move in and out. But I asked, how big is the truck? It's a small truck. And I asked the management office, why don't you move it to near the lifts where there's high traffic flow? The truck from previously, where they couldn't even fill in one small truck a month, became just by a simple movement of where the plastic recycling bins are, they come 5 times a week now because it's overflowing. So many solutions do not need any money. Actually, you just need operational detail in the way we can change people's behaviors. Then let's look at another one. Transport, construction, and it's not about just construction of roads and highways. It's also construction in property development and all. Before we get all gung-ho, which is good by itself, EV cars, right? But how about, let's look at the overall bigger picture. If we have this pie of number of cars, vehicles, this pie, let's maintain this pie moving forward instead of adding more and more. We can't build our way out of the climate crisis, right? So let's have this amount of cars, maintain it, or even shrink it. And within this shrinking pie, have more share of EV vehicles on a cleaner grid. And that's sustainable transport. And let's talk with our feet. Let's walk more, let's cycle, and give feedback to our local councils and our MPs to have that investments. And in terms of green growth, it can be a just transition. We can say, let's be world leader or regional leader in manufacturing, MRT systems, buses, coaches, and all. We can invest in green technologies and become competitive in those industries, because cars is a very competitive industry, right? We have Japanese and Korean cars and Chinese cars. But how about we become world leaders in building MRT systems, for example? So if we can reduce energy production and consumption for plastics, construction, transport, and then here we are in the rest of the other sectors, right? Energy efficiency and energy reduction. And that can be done. We can switch off our air cons. I now do not have aircon in the house. I have, if I really need to, if it gets hot, I use the fan, there's many trees around. So if we can have, right, to incentivize both residential, commercial, and industrial to really use carrot and sticks, reward those, and also then have penalties, right? We have 5-star rating, not just for consumer appliances, but for industrial machinery, and incentivize them. The chart on the left shows there's actually transmission loss. So energy supply versus actual energy consumption. And our netter perhaps is based on energy supply. And that's why we need 300 billion by 2030, 1.3 trillion 2040, 2050. 1.3 trillion, it's mind-boggling, right? And as a Malaysian, it's fiscally not sustainable. I will get very excited if I can say, can we reduce the 300 billion to 100 billion, right? And then the other savings that we repurpose that for education, for healthcare, for green infrastructure. So here, that transmission loss, how can we make it more efficient? Solar on rooftops, because there's no transmission loss. So if we can incentivize commercial buildings, condos, urban, Malaysia is 80% urban, to have solar on rooftops. This efficiency, the consumption, we already 1/3 down in terms of our energy usage, right? And also reduce energy and the urban heat island effect. We have 24 degrees Celsius, and it's not just a number, because at 20 degrees Celsius for the aircon, the energy rate goes exponentially up for every 1 degree Celsius. So 24 degrees is really the optimum. So I stop here to say there's time for action. We can do this. And it's by thinking with both our heart and our heads. Because when we think as parents, as sons and daughters, the conversation changes. It's no longer, it's so expensive, we need incentives and subsidies. We'll ask the question, how do we make it work? How can we work better together? We will have a long-term view versus short-term profits. We can do this, and we can actually do it in a very sustainable way, financially, fiscally, environmentally, and economically. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you, Tan Mei Ling, for the sharing just now. And let's jump straight to the next keynote. Ladies and gentlemen, our next keynote speaker leads the Investment Stewardship Division at Permodalan Nasional Berhad with 18 years of combined experience in corporate finance, mergers and acquisitions, strategy and sustainability. So to continue topic investment strategies and decarbonizing the economy, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Muazzam Muhammad, Senior VP, Head of Investment Stewardship Division of Permodalan Nasional Berhad, PNB.
Thank
you. Over to you, Muazzam.
Thank you. Thanks also to Ms. Tan for highlighting, why is it that we do what we do, and the importance of everybody actually championing climate change. And I'm going to switch gears a bit to talk more about from the investments perspective and how we are playing our role against decarbonizing the economy. Thank you also to CGM for inviting PNB to be a part of this conference. It's a privilege to be here today to talk about a very important topic. And in the fight against climate change, the financial sector, as we know it from the sessions this morning, plays a very crucial role in terms of fighting climate change. And the role is equally important for institutional investors like us, like PNB, because we are very uniquely positioned to be a part of this transformation. In 2022, PNB launched its 10 ESG commitments, and I'm just going to name a few of them. So we have a 2050 target to reach net zero portfolio, and with that, we have set up our midterm targets. So we aim to reduce our carbon intensity emissions 30% by 2030, 70% of our portfolio to have a net zero target also by 2030, no new investments in greenfield coal, and then we have a policy also against deforestation, peatland and exploitation. We commit to invest 10 billion ringgit in green and transition assets by 2030. We have a labour rights policy. And then, of course, on the stewardship side, we have a triple bottom line model, focusing not just on profits and people, but also the planet. So when we crafted our ESG commitments, we actually premised it based on 5 key principles. Number 1 is that we believe that ESG drives long-term value. And number 2, being a key investor in Malaysia, we have a leadership role to play. And then the third is to be cognizant that it takes collective action, especially from the previous session that we've heard. Number 4 is walking the talk, because whatever we tell our investee companies to do, we ourselves must change as well. And last but not least, it's more on progress over perfection, because everybody knows that it's not easy to reach net zero. Everybody needs to work on it together and learn together along the way as well. So I'll craft my session today into 2 sections. The first one is explaining more on how PNB and other institutional investors play a big part. And then second part is to highlight again why are we doing all this. So the first one, people like us, we are fiduciaries. We manage capital invested by the public, and it's a huge responsibility for us to monitor and steward our companies, especially when it comes to sustainability. So the first one that we started with was setting clear expectations. So IIs like us articulate clear expectations on not just on climate disclosure, but specifically on decarbonization target. For us at PNB, what we did last year was to baseline our Scope 3 emissions, particularly finance emissions, and that allowed us to understand where our emissions come from, who are the top emitters, which are the sectors that we should be focusing on, and which are the companies that we should focus our engagements on. And that has really helped us to really develop our own net zero assessment, our own sustainability assessment, and guides us in terms of our engagements and working together with our investing companies. And I think setting clear expectations from the start is very important, whilst being cognizant that every company is unique. They have their own management team, so we let the companies develop their own specific initiatives, but at the end of the day, we push the agenda of the importance of reaching net zero by 2050. The second part is, just to deep dive a little bit more on the engagements and advocacy. Of course, being a prominent investor, because we manage approximately 340 billion ringgit in assets, and approximately 9 to 10% of Bursa Malaysia are actually investments that we made. So we have a very unique position, quite a lot of leverage when it comes to engaging our portfolio companies. And it's all about having meaningful dialogues on certain key things. Just to share with you, when we assess whether a company has a credible net zero plan, we are guided by the net zero investment framework, whereby there are 6 critical areas. I'm not going to name all of them here, but the 2 key elements that we are talking to our investing companies on is on number 1, on setting strategy to decarbonize, and number 2 is to actively allocate capital towards that. And those 2 key elements actually form the main agenda whenever we talk to our top emitters. And on top of climate change, there are other emerging or important topics that we also engage them with. These include on adaptation and resilience. There's a lot of commitments on climate change mitigation, but another thing that we should focus equally more on is on the A&R side, because we all know that the world that we will live in the next 26, 27 years is a different one. So essentially, companies need to adapt their business model according to the changing landscape. The other 2 areas that we are engaging actively with our investing companies would be on the labor rights front. Labor rights is a very important topic, especially for the labor-intensive sectors. And then a new and emerging thing that we are doing is on nature and biodiversity. So we recognize that there's a strong linkage between climate change and nature. And we all know that if you compare NBS versus technology-based solutions, NBS is the most effective cost-wise and in terms of being readily available. So just to share, we do direct engagements with our portfolio companies. We encourage them to also measure their scope 3, work with their supply chain, and the expectation is that all of this will trickle down towards their suppliers and then the suppliers under them as well. And at the end of the day, it's all about collaboration, and we felt that it's important that people who are slightly more advanced than the others also share their experiences, which is why we actually developed a community. We call it a sustainability committee that's headed by, that's chaired by Maybank, and then it's membered by the sustainability reps from all of our key investing companies. And from time to time, we do knowledge sharing sessions. Just to share, we did one on ISSB recently. We're going to do one on TNFD, just to increase the awareness and knowledge on the key emerging topics. The third point on how we play a role in decarbonizing the economy is on incentivizing green investments. As I mentioned earlier, we have a 10 billion target to invest in green and transition assets. We have our own internal taxonomy on that. And we are actively tracking against that achievement. 10 billion might sound a little bit small, particularly because our AUM is about 340 billion. But again, it's a midterm target. We can see where we are progressing and see where we can grow from there. And reallocating investments towards low carbon solutions is key, particularly domestically. As you've seen earlier, that a lot of the climate change impact, you can see it from our energy mix, the cars that are on the roads, single-use plastics, and what have you. So a lot of that actually goes back to what are the type of investments that we should see in this country. So those are the 3 key things that actually IIs like PNB is championing. It's an ongoing journey. Every company is at a different stage, and above all, we want a collaborative model. and for everybody to transition together. And it goes without saying that on the question of why are we doing this, at the end of the day, there are really 4 key items. Number one, it's on risk mitigation. Because again and again, when we communicate to our investing companies, we tell them that climate risk is business risk. All of your businesses are at risk. And for investors like us, that translates to investment risk. And knowing all this, actually on top of the usual risks that one would measure, decarbonizing helps to mitigate all of this and strengthens the long-term viability of the business. Number 2, as we've listened earlier this morning, it's on access to capital. As more and more institutions like us integrate ESG into our decision making, you'll see that on top of the regular checks and KYCs that you see, the emissions profile, the assessments on the decarbonization or the net zero targets that the company has form a very important part of our own assessment. And companies who are late in the game would find themselves eventually losing access to critical capital. Number 3 is on efficiency and innovation. Just to share, as we engage our companies, we notice that some of them actually raise a concern on, as companies embrace ESG, it involves cost, involves time. So how does it benefit them? And again, when you look at the global players, you can see that as companies embrace sustainability, they can actually see a lot of improvements on operational efficiency and also innovation. For instance, by reducing waste, like what Ms. Tan mentioned earlier, companies can lower their operating costs. As you switch to more energy efficient equipment, you will also save on your energy costs, which is why you see the energy usage has actually been going down. And you can see actually companies who has embraced ESG holistically will see that there are other adjacencies within their own business model that they can actually expand upon. So actually, the great realization that must happen is that on the topic of sustainability, it's actually important because the viability of existing the old or the traditional economies is actually going to be challenged, because you're going to see a different type of landscape among the big economies around the world. And lastly is on resilience. Companies who are decarbonizing well will be more resilient, especially on the impact of climate change, whether is it on supply chain disruption, shifts in consumer preferences, new regulation, and even attracting new talent. And it ensures that all these companies are better positioned to thrive in a future where sustainability is not just an option, but it's actually a requirement. So I have 3 minutes left, but in closing, the transition to a low carbon economy is not just urgent, but it's a good opportunity for companies to relook at how they do business. And which is why institutions like PNB, we have a tremendous responsibility to lead this change. We also have regular conversations with other JLICs on the same topic, and not only on decarbonizing our portfolios, but encouraging our investing companies to do the same. So the road ahead will be challenging. I think let's not forget about that. But the benefits are very clear on reduced risk, enhanced reputation, enhanced operational efficiency, greater access to capital, and ultimately to be more sustainable and prosperous for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Muazzam. There we go, ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause. And we'll jump straight to our next session, our next keynote for climate concerns of minority shareholders shall be presented by someone who is a dedicated advocate of corporate governance, sustainability, business development, and strategy, who held pivotal roles where he played a crucial part in shaping Malaysia's corporate governance framework. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Ismet Yusof, CEO of Minority Shareholders Watch Group. Let's give him a big hand.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Assalamualaikum. Good afternoon. I thought I'll be speaking from here as a bit more informal. Well, we have heard for the past, well, yesterday and today, and I'm sure tomorrow, about the importance of sustainability and importance of this climate crisis. But the question is now, is what does it mean for minority shareholders? Well, minority shareholders, as its name, well, technically you may own as little as 100 shares in a company. That's a minimum bar, which is not much. And also you can even own as well as much as 3 million shares, for that matter. That brings you up to the top 30 list of shareholders. Does it matter? How much impact can you bring? And how much impact can you make change for the company that you invest in? So that technically somehow or other trigger to a point to say, well, do I need to care about climate crisis? Because at the end of the day, I'm just a minority. That begs the question, well, technically, whether or not, who cares? Or in Malay, we call it siapa peduli. Who cares? Well, of course, it is something that we all need to care as a minority shareholders or individual who are putting your money in it. At MSWG, we are technically a shareholder activist representing the voice and interests of minority shareholders for listed companies. Well, what we do is that we analyze all listed companies in Malaysia, all 950 of them. But what we do in addition to that is that we are a shareholder of about 450 listed companies. Well, that gives us the right to then attend, speak, and vote at general meetings. Well, the 450 companies covers 80% of the market capitalization, and for which it covers across 12 states. There are 3 matters that normally is within our purview and what we analyze. We look into the company's operation, we look into the company's financial performance, and also governance. But what we make change this year is that we put a little bit more focus on climate crisis. So we ask company questions. We ask company, well, what do you do to mitigate issues on climate crisis that is very much relevant to your company? Well, I have to be honest with you, I've been shushed many times at general meetings by the board because of this issue. At the end of the day, for them, it's bottom line. The most important thing is that I make money for you and give you the dividend. I've also been tapped on my shoulder a few times at general meeting because it is something that is not an important issue. How much return is at the end of the day still the fundamental outcome and questions that people are looking for. But at MSWG, what we do, well, we don't care. We still ask those questions. We still push companies to do better. So I would like to share with you 2 case studies, 2 examples of companies that we actually push this agenda and raise the concern about climate crisis. The first one is a company, well, they are located on southern part of the peninsula. It's called Guancong Berhad. Guancong Berhad is a company that produces cocoa, that technically produces cocoa for the manufacturing of chocolates. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a very sad news to share with you that there's a study that just been presented for which chocolate or cocoa will extinct by the year 2050. It's a sad news for me, particularly because I love chocolate. So just imagine, by 2050, there's no more chocolate for us, for the next generation. We may have to rely on on preservatives, on other alternatives for sugar. So how does it impact companies, listed companies on this matter? For this company, it doesn't technically diversify its business. It's purely 100% work on cocoa manufacturing. So they import cocoa from the Ivory Coast. We used to have cocoa, and Malaysia used to produce cocoa back in the 80s. Our cocoa is one of the best and top in the world. But because of insects and the use of pesticides, well, our cocoa trees technically wipe out throughout Malaysia. So that's the reason why we have to now import cocoa from the Ivory Coast. Well, the problem then now is that there's an issue in Ivory Coast that impacted the supply of cocoa. What was the issue is that, number one, Ivory Coast is faced with a massive flooding. And why is it massive flooding? It's because of climate change. So because of that, technically, it also grew up a pesticide, which called, one moment here, I think the slides is a bit slow. Yeah, so it triggers a shortage of supply within the ecosystem. Now, in Ivory Coast, technically, where the plantation of cocoa is and where this company took the supply from, there's a massive reduction of areas for which it can technically harvest cocoa. So by 2050, you'll be able to see the land mass for cocoa harvesting is getting lesser and lesser. It's getting smaller and smaller. You have a massive flood, like I mentioned just now, happening in Ivory Coast. And the biggest challenge now is this cocoa swollen shoot disease that is eating up all of your cocoa and eating up all of your chocolates slowly. Because of this issue, technically what happened is that the cocoa prices has increased. And it increased significantly. And it increased to an extent of up to 98% within the period of just 1 year. So the supply, because the supply is less, the demand is more, and you can't just get cocoa. That's also the reason why the chocolate sales have technically declined in the recent months. You'll be able to see people have started to look for all the alternative. Well, apparently, JP Morgan says that people are resorting to products like cookies and salty snacks, which I don't think so because I still eat my chocolate every day. So, ladies and gentlemen, we don't ask hard questions at MICG, but we ask simple and pertinent questions. And these are the questions that we raise to the company. How do you manage this situation? How you manage the cocoa production now, and how you're going to manage the supposedly extinction of cocoa in the next, well, less than 30 years? Well, we do have, we would not have a very well answered question because I think it's very much difficult. According to them, it's very much difficult to predict what happened in the next 30 years. You know, you may be able to turn this around, but fundamental is that with us asking this question, it get the company to start think and start to strategize as this watchdog is going to keep on barking on these issues to them. I'll get to a point why I raise all this later. The second bit is also on a company called MSM. I'm sure a lot of you know MSM is a sugar-based company that provides, that technically produces sugar for Malaysia. At this juncture, we don't have much sugar cane in Malaysia. Why? People are not interested in planting sugar cane. People may want to resort to do palm oil more. That's a fact. So we have to import sugar cane. Sugar cane is imported technically from South of America, and now, of course, there's an issue about importing similar to cocoa, not extinct, but it's, import barriers, as well as cost of importing is increasing. And that's the reason why that impacted the financial performance of the company. So we asked the question at the general meeting, how do the company manage this? Well, the simple answer is, technically, they do have a buffer in importing sugar canes for the companies, and they're trying to find other alternative and resources in order for them to mitigate the supply of sugar cane. They're also working with the government to ensure that the local farmers are more interested in planting sugar cane. Well, hopefully, if you guys have land, please do consider planting sugar cane because we need sugar. Again, like chocolate, I also love sugar, and also I have to have drinks in my sugar. So it's a stable food. Malaysian being Malaysian. Well, ladies and gentlemen, again, at the end of the day, the question is, who cares? Siapa peduli? Well, the answer to this is both parties must care. The company must care, the shareholders must care. The company must care in the sense that do consider the viability of the company. The first example, it doesn't diversify its business at all. 100% of your business production is from cocoa. Just imagine you are going this for a long run with us as a shareholder. By the next 20 years, if cocoa is no longer around, what do you do with the company? You wind down, you delist. What will happen to the shareholders? What will happen to the value of the shares? That's one. Number two, communication. These past 2 days, if we able to chart the technical terms that has been used, I'll be honest with you, it's so much complicated. We attend AGMs from the largest of the largest companies to the smallest of the smallest companies. From Klang Valley, up north, down south, to the Borneos. The understanding of terms that is being used varies. If you're in Klang Valley, you'll be able to speak to the larger companies, you talk about decarbonization, wow, they'll be like, I got the idea. But if you go to certain, well, outside of Klang Valley, some of these directors may not even understand the concept of decarbonization, what more about sequestration, what more about all your big jargons on sustainability. Communication is important, communication must be made simple. That's our message from FSWG. The third one is for shareholders. I believe every single one of you here today, either directly or indirectly, are investor and investing, whether it's in equity market, whether it's in unit trust, or any other parts of the capital market products. Exercise your rights. You have a right to voice, you have the rights to raise concern, you have the rights to then speak up and vote at the general meeting. It is a very lonely journey if MSWG continue to do this, but we will continue to do this, but we want your support from the other shareholders to help us make change, particularly in companies, particularly in how they manage their climate issues. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you to CGM for inviting me. I hope next year I can come back and I can share with you more of our findings. This is just the two. I just took over for 6 months. These are the 2 things that we have just pushed. We hope that we can push more. We hope I can share with you more outcomes from what we have done. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, Doctor. What a scary presentation, because a world without chocolate is inhabitable for me. I cannot live without chocolate. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's proceed further with our next keynotes. Key sustainability focus areas for Asia, which will be presented by the head of Asia Pacific ESG Client Engagement, S&P Global. She focuses on helping financial institutions integrate sustainability into their workflows and reporting requirements. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Sanya Joseph to the stage.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for your time. We at S&P Global are delighted to be here, and we would love to thank our dear hosts, Climate Governance Malaysia, for facilitating this forum, which allows us to come together as a group to discuss all things sustainability. Now, in the course of this year, I have traveled extensively in Asia and spoken to a lot of asset managers, financial institutions, corporates. And what I'm going to talk about in the next 15 minutes is essentially distilled from those conversations. Now, there are certain topics and themes that keep coming up, and these are also themes that we at S&P Global believe are going to be really pertinent and relevant in the next 12 to 18 months. So, broadly speaking today, in the next 15 minutes, I'll be covering 4 themes around biodiversity, physical risk, reporting regulations, and sustainable finance. So the importance of biodiversity has been actually established even when we had Mr. Mohammed from PNB present, but why nature and why care? Right now, we believe that nature is critical for achieving net zero. As you can see from the slide here, that when you look at the wetland soils, the boreal forest and the temperate grasslands, even the tropical forest, the soil itself acts as a big source or big sink for carbon. Right now, imagine the kind of potential we would have if we can complement the carbon capture capabilities of soil with the advancements that we are doing in carbon capture and storage technologies. Now, to put things into perspective, the world forests, they absorb around 15.6 gigatons of carbon dioxide emission, which is essentially 3x the times of the annual United States emissions. Right, so we believe that by focusing on nature-based solutions, it definitely takes us closer to the Paris Agreement. Right, and this is a view that has also been supported by the 2023 report that was published by the World Economic Forum, where it listed the loss of biodiversity as the 4th most critical challenge that we as a world need to address in the next 10 years. But we also understand that this is an easier said than done challenge, because it's a hard balance to strike between how we come up with initiatives that can help with energy transition while minimizing the impact on biodiversity. Right now, let me give you an example. At S&P Global, we did this study. We looked at around 30,000 mines, which was mining for key minerals needed for energy transition. So these were mines that were mining for cobalt, copper, graphite, lithium, etc. And we overlapped these mines with key biodiversity areas to see how many of these mines were actually overlapping or located in these nature critical areas. Almost 29% of the mines that were operating or were in the exploration phases were actually located in a KBA, right? So, and hence we understand it's a fine balance to strike. Now, if as a corporate I have to adopt a nature positive attitude, then that would essentially mean that I need to start by setting out nature related commitments. Right now, the graph on the top represents the number of companies across various regional indices and how many of those companies have actually set any nature-related commitments. Now, as you can see, Europe leads the pack with around 35% of the companies in the S&P Europe 350 that has actually set some nature-related commitments. Contrast that with 10% of the Asia-Pacific Large Mid-Cap Index and abysmal 5% of S&P 500. Right? So you will see that most of this graph is denoted or is kind of like mostly gray than blue and green. The grays are essentially portions of companies which have not set any nature-related commitments. There are certain industries that lead the pack when it comes to setting biodiversity commitments. So electric utilities, multi-water utilities, food products, paper and forest products, they are the industries where we have seen a good adoption of either setting a no deforestation commitment or setting nature positive commitments. But a lot needs to be done. Now, with the loss in biodiversity, with the loss in natural cover, with soil erosion, with increased commercial buildings, etc., it is not surprising that we are seeing an increase in climate hazards in the last couple of years, right? Which brings me to my second theme around physical risk. Now, when we did this research on how physical risk is supposed to impact the world, we all understand that everyone's going to be impacted by physical hazards. But that impact is not going to be equally distributed across all regions. If you look at Europe, Europe is expected to lose only 1% of its GDP because of these physical risk-caused calamities. While if you look at East Asia, almost 5% of GDP is at risk, and South Asia, you have almost 15% of GDP that is at risk from these physical hazards. Even the kind of physical hazards that we are facing is not uniform, right? We all understand that obviously temperature is going to be a key concern for all regions. Now, if you look at Europe, the key concern for Europe is going to be water stress, not extreme heat as much. But look at East Asia and look at South Asia, the key drivers of these hazards or the key drivers of impact is essentially going to be temperature. It's going to be water stress, but it's also going to be multiple types of floodings. When we zoom into Malaysia specifically and we look at the companies that are part of the KLSC 30 index, and we look at where these companies' assets are located, and we see which hazards are these assets most susceptible, we pretty much get a similar answer, where most of the companies in the KLSC 30 seems to be quite susceptible to extreme heat, drought, as well as pluvial flooding. And this financial impact of these physical hazards, it's only going to increase with time, and it's only going to become severe with various SSP scenarios. Now, this is a quick illustration of the map that we had created for Malaysia for flooding. Now, the areas in pink on the left-hand side essentially highlights the areas that are susceptible to fluvial flooding. And on the right-hand side, you will notice that there are a lot of areas highlighted in orange, which are regions which are quite susceptible to pluvial flooding. Right? So we understand that physical risk is going to have a material impact on the company's operations. It's going to have a financial impact, right? Now, which is why, as investors and shareholders, we need to be made aware of what this financial impact is going to look like. And we also need to know what a company's strategy is on addressing those concerns. which is why in the last couple of months, you would have seen an increased adoption in reporting frameworks like ISSP and TCFD. And while there are a lot of countries and security commissions that has encouraged or even made it mandatory for corporates to start reporting on these reporting frameworks, we're also seeing an increase in regulations with regards to sustainability in areas like, or in regions like EU. I would specifically want to highlight 2 regulations that was recently introduced in EU. I think they have been delayed, but it's still quite relevant for this region here. The first regulation that EU introduced was the EU Deforestation Regulation, which is supposed to become effective by 31st of December, I think, next year. Now, the idea here is that across all EU member states, it will require companies that are importing a set of agri products to prove that none of their supply chains have contributed to the destruction of forests anywhere in the world. And the second regulation which has been put into effect is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which essentially ensures that any product that is going to be imported into EU pays the same amount of carbon tax that's effective in EU, irrespective of the carbon tax that is in effect in the country that was producing that goods. Right? So what does it mean for countries that are exporting a lot of its goods to Europe? It means there's going to be deep scrutiny into the deforestation impacts of the production process. It's going to have a scrutiny, or it's going to have an impact on the prices that your importers will now need to pay for the goods that they are importing. Right? Now, because of this increase in scrutiny and supervision, we do foresee a lot of greenwashing. And we do see a lot of litigations that would be associated with these greenwashing concerns. And you can see, based on the color, Australia seems to be quite active in terms of the litigations that has been filed, climate-related litigations that has been filed in the last couple of years. I want to give 2 real-life examples on how companies were publicly called out for greenwashing. First is in Europe, where you had a Dutch airline company called KLM, where its customers actually sued it, or actually they had a case against it, where they said that it was understating the emissions and it was understating the fact that the impact on the environment. So its Fly Responsibly campaign was said to be quite misleading. Closer home, just last month in August, there was a superannuation fund in Australia, which was fined $7.4 million for making false claims about some of its sustainable investment options. Mercer was the firm, and they actually admitted to the allegations and will now be paying that fine. Unfortunately, this is the world that we are living in. It's going to be a tough act to identify which are the companies that talk and which are the companies that walk the talk, right? Which is why it makes it essential for us to ensure that any company that we are putting our money in or we are engaging with needs to have a proper net zero commitment plan. And also, if you have the plan, how are you financing that plan? Right? That's where the idea of sustainable finance is going to come into the picture. Now, you will notice that in the last couple of years, that's the green chart on the top, there has been an increase in the issuances of green, social, and sustainability-linked bonds. It peaked in 2021. There was a bit of a dip in 2022, but 2023 and 2024 are expected to be great recovery years for these bonds. When you look at the top 10 countries that have issued these sort of like bonds, it's very heartening to see that there are 3 Asian names in the top 10. There's Japan, there's Thailand, and there's South Korea, right? Now, again, a lot of this data is taken from the Climate Bonds Initiative itself, so it's easy to kind of like refresh and see what the numbers for 2024 looks like. When we look at companies and how they set targets and how they are funding those targets, there's an interesting case study that I came across, which was Wilmar International. Now, as you can see from the texts here, in the last 1 year, it has actually worked to convert a big portion of its revolving credit facility into a sustainability-linked loan. Most recently, it secured 100 million funding from Maybank for a tenure of 3 years. Right, a lot of the KPIs underneath it would be pertinent or would require Wilmar to actually adhere to some of the sustainability initiatives or some of the sustainability goals that it has set for itself. Right, so I want to close by making this one last statement that as financial institutions who are the bearers of capital, it's important for us to also make sure, or even as investors, it's important for us to make sure that we are channeling the funds for causes that can make the world a better place. Again, this was something that was alluded to in the last two presentations as well, where returns and profitability should not be the bottom line, but also the long-term benefit, both to the people as well as to the planet, needs to be taken into account. So thank you so much for your time, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.
There we go. Thank you, Sonia, for that sharing, and also for lots of research done on this particular topic. Ladies and gentlemen, we now continue on to the next keynote for financial institution net zero transition plans. The speaker works to unite the financial sector across Asia Pacific to support an inclusive transition to a net zero economy. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Yuki Yasui, Managing Director for Asia Pacific Network at Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. Let's give her a big hand.
Good afternoon, everyone, and a big thanks to Climate Governance Malaysia for inviting me. And I stand between you and your lunch, and I will maybe make my presentation 15 minutes as well. I know I've been given kindly a 20-minute slot, but I think I'll try and make it in 15 minutes and still make it useful for you. So, as introduced, I'm from GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, and just want to do a quick introduction of who we are. So we are the global coalition for financial institutions that are committed to net zero, meaning that they're committed to not only scope 1 and 2, but also scope 3, which is their finance emissions or their portfolio, decarbonizing their lending or investing portfolio to net zero by 2050. And there are nearly 700 financial institutions around the world, and we represent about 40% of the private financial assets globally. So in Asia, we are about 100 financial institutions, and in Malaysia, we have CIMB and Maybank as part of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, and we are hoping that the next wave of committed financial institutions will onboard the GFANZ and the Net Zero Alliance community soon from Malaysia as well. We're very hopeful because all these kind of good events have really raised awareness and action by financial institutions in Malaysia, and we're really honored to be part of this journey as well. So, when we're talking about net zero and what the role of financial institutions are, we've been talking about their bread and butter, which is scope 3, where their financing products and services go. And at GFANZ, we've identified 4 key financing strategies for net zero. So this is where different types of finances can help finance the real economy to their net zero journey. So we're not only talking about financing the green stuff, but also financing the brown to green transition that was mentioned in the morning panel, and also the accelerated retirement of existing assets in our economy that is high emitting, like coal-fired power plants that may be too young, that if they just go and be used for their natural economic life, it may not fit our net zero pathways. So when we're talking about these 4 financing strategies, it's really important to understand 2 things. One is that vast majority of finance today are still going into finances that are not part of this 4 buckets and are in what we call a developing bucket. The idea of GFANZ and the commitments that financial institutions are making around the world is to bring as much as possible and as quick as possible finance to the market that aligns with one of these 4 buckets. And when we mean as much as possible, we're actually talking about mainstreaming finance in these 4 buckets. That we're no longer talking about green finance as a niche product, but as part of the business strategy of financial institutions around the world. So there's been a lot of speakers that have talked about needing strategy for net zero and needing transition plans. And I think transition plan is something that you will increasingly hear. It's only like we've at GFANZ only started to talk about net zero transition plans in 2022. We issued a framework around net zero transition plans then. And so it's a very new landscape, but we see quite a quick take up of this idea that we all need not just a strategy, but an actual action plan towards net zero. Because as I said, we're moving from niche to mainstream. And in order to do that, we're actually going to be experiencing a structural change in our economy, which means for individual firms and individual financial institutions, we are talking about a institutional-wide change management. So we need to include the transition plan as part of the actual implementation to net zero. And just to say that GFANZ is a sister organization of TCFD. The co-chairs of TCFD, Mark Carney and Michael Bloomberg, are also co-chairs of GFANZ. And so TCFD was looking at climate risk, and now what GFANZ is doing is we're talking about the actual solutions that we need now that we understand that climate risk is real, it's systemic, and it's irreversible. So a lot of the disclosure requirements are going to be shifting towards including not just about your risk, but also what you're going to do about that risk and the solution side of climate change. And ISSB in June this year has already announced that it will look at transition plans as part of the ongoing development of ISSB. And UK and other countries around the world are already starting to think about how they incorporate transition plans in their disclosure as well. Now, I just want to come to Malaysia quickly now. So we have been honored to partner with JC3 and BNM SEC to work actively in Malaysia on capacity building around net zero transition plans. And we did a survey in June this year on where financial institutions in Malaysia are in terms of their capabilities and their interest in gaining new capabilities on climate change. And in the use of this survey, we have used a criteria called the Climate Mitigation Journey, which is developed by United Nations Environment Programme's Finance Initiative. So up on the top, you'll see 15 different capabilities that UNEP-FI had identified as key capabilities for financial institutions in order to carry out their climate mitigation journey. And we asked the Malaysian financial institutions on how much they feel comfortable that they have these capabilities and which are the areas that they want to obtain. And we, based on the 40 responses that we have, and thank you so much if you have been part of the team that have helped us in this response, we have found that the key barriers to climate mitigation journey is, first of all, data, which I know that the SEC and the Bursa Malaysia are doing quite a lot around to improve that, but also the lack of technical knowledge, lack of human resources, and then public policy and so forth. In terms of what capabilities the respondents said they wanted their senior management to have is very interesting, because the first one is about transition plans, and then impact analysis, and then climate risk. I think transition plans is a key role for the leadership of financial institutions or any corporation, because it is a very top-down change management, which is very holistic for the whole of the organization. And it does definitely require that leadership and governance to really keep people accountable and also incentivize the action plan. So with that, I just want to introduce what the GFAN's Net Zero Transition Plan framework actually looks like. And a lot of the financial institutions that are part of GFAN's are developing their transition plan using this framework. So it is actually quite similar to the TCFD framework, and we also identify that a lot of the efforts that financial institutions and corporates have been doing on sustainability are built on this plan. So the more you have already done your sustainability journey, the easier it is to do this plan. Having said that, if you are still like in that learning development, I think it's not too early to start this framework, even while you are still doing your baseline assessments of your financed emissions or doing your climate impact analysis and so forth. Now, the key part of this framework, of course, we'll start with governance because this is a governance summit, but is that leadership and culture and accountability and incentives. And here, one of the key messages is that capacity building, that we are no longer talking about sustainability capacity for a small group of ESG experts in a small team within a big organization. We're talking about sustainability expertise being required in all different types of departments across an institution. So it's a little bit like digitalization. You need IT experts, but you yourself need to use the computer on a day-to-day basis. And sustainability is becoming that kind of skill. So this actually mirrors the Malaysia survey that we did, that reskilling, upskilling, and capacity building is a huge requirement and also a need right now. So it's good that Malaysia survey has revealed that FIs in Malaysia are already understanding that that's a need. The other two, I think, key things that I wanted to talk about today is the two strategies in the middle, the implementation strategy and the engagement strategy. And both of them actually have been talked about by previous speakers today. So it's nothing new, but I just want to put it in this kind of framework. So the implementation strategy is where you are developing your products and services, that four financing strategy, the four buckets that we at GFANS call transition finance, is developed and actually provided to the market. So you need to actually have green finance, transition finance, different products and services that you can deliver for net zero. At the same time, you also need internal policies. You need to adjust your credit ratings, your due diligence and policies and conditions accordingly to be able to deliver those new products. So there's a lot of innovation and reskilling that needs to happen in the implementation strategy. So this is the supply of finance that is being delivered through the transition plan. But we also think that financial institutions can do a lot around the demand side of finance as well. That financial institutions can talk with their clients, their investee companies, and help them, and also understand where they are in their journey and help them with their transition plan, and then make sure that there is that demand for finance that you are able to deliver. So this is like engagement with clients and investee companies, but it can also be engagements with policymakers that is really important. Having a good understanding and good conversation with your government is really important, and engagement with the industry and coming together in forums like this is also really helpful as well. So what this transition plan is saying is that we need not only to develop our capabilities to supply the finance, but also develop that good relationship with others to be able to build that, support that demand for that finance. So this is in just a reconfiguration of that plan. And let me just then try and finish with a few resources to take home for your own reading as well. So how does these plans work in practice? So as I said, a lot of the financial institutions have started to create net zero transition plans. And so we have compiled a few case studies on the latest and the first iteration of net zero transition plans from financial institutions in this part of the world. So in July last year, we put out the components of transition plan because at the time it was too early for transition, like full end-to-end transition plans. But we also already noted that there's actually a lot of components of transition plan that already existed. And that's why I said that net zero transition plan isn't something new, that it is built on experience. And then this year, we have already seen quite a lot of transition plans end-to-end, and these are featured in this report. Also, let me see if there was one more slide. Yeah, this one is more of a capacity building material. So this is developed by our GFANS global team in London and New York. And basically it's called Workshop in a Box, and it's like a self-learning material that you can just teach yourself. It's a set of slides that go into quite a lot of detail and give examples of what these net zero transition plan frameworks look like and how the components actually work in practice. And the last one is the newest one, which is on some case studies around transition finance. So what does a climate solution look like? What does a supporting that brown to green decarbonization journey look like? And we call it aligning finance. Look like or manage phase out. So I hope these are very useful resources. And in Malaysia, GFANS has been working with JC3 on developing capacity building courses in Malaysia that work around these themes. And we'll be continuing to do more workshops in the next few months as well. Thank you very much for listening.
There we go. Thank you. Give it up for Yuki Yasui once again, ladies and gentlemen. And also, Yuki, we appreciate that you are finishing up earlier ahead than what you're supposed to. Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, before I let you all leave for lunch, just one small cooperation. If you would kindly scan the QR code, which we will show on screen right now, for you to fill up our survey form. Now, understand every event has its own weaknesses, and we would like to get some feedback from you. Probably some strengths. We'd like to get some comments as well on how we can improve further. What do you like? What do you dislike? Or maybe what you can recommend for our future events. We would very much appreciate if you can do this, because then we can further improve our next coming events. Ladies and gentlemen, as you are filling out our online survey form, I'm pleased to announce that lunch has been served. We will now proceed with a lunch break. The masterclasses and the workshops will start at 2 p.m. sharp. So please join your respective sessions based on the location provided. Now you may refer to the WOVA app for this. And as you leave, ladies and gentlemen, please do not forget your personal belongings. I wish you a fruitful masterclasses and workshops, as well as a pleasant lunch ahead. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you at the masterclass and workshop. Have a pleasant afternoon ahead. See you.